Chapter 2156. You. Lord Qin was at a loss for words. His face was filled with anger as he shouted, "Brat, you're twisting words and forcing logic." Ji Tianqing glanced at him, then looked at Yuan Zhen with a faint smile and asked, "What's wrong?" "Lord Qin's words are reasonable, and I'm twisting words and forcing logic just because I refuted. Since Heaven's End God Nation is so unreasonable, what's the point of talking nonsense?" Lord Qin's face turned black as he glared at Ji Tianqing with a murderous glint in his eyes. "Brat, you're inverting right and wrong. You're the one who killed the guards of Strange Maple Garden, destroyed it, and severely injured Bai Xiao. This is obvious to all. No matter how you quibble, you can't deny it." Ji Tianqing sneered, "I'm new here and am not even familiar with Sky Gazing City. Why would I come to Strange Maple Garden? Isn't it because Bai Xiao plotted against me? Your so-called Strange Maple Garden guards are 50 Tribulation Realm powerhouses, and they're all elites of Heaven's End Alliance. Does Lord Qin think that Heaven's End Alliance is so powerful that Tribulation Realm powerhouses are only fit to be manor guards? Anyone with a brain would understand what's going on. But Lord Qin, you're biased towards Bai Xiao and put the blame on me. I think you're either stupid or have ulterior motives." Ji Tianqing scolded Lord Qin mercilessly in front of so many powerful people. Lord Qin was so angry that the veins on his face bulged, and his body emitted a cold murderous intent. "Brat! What a sharp tongue! Not only are you twisting right and wrong in front of everyone, but you also dare to insult me. You probably don't know my methods. Tonight, no matter how eloquent you are, it's useless. I'll make you plead guilty." As he spoke, Lord Qin's body lit up with a white light, and he was about to attack Ji Tianqing with a spell. Ji Tianqing sneered and said loudly, "Everyone saw it. They want to reason, so I'll reason with them. But Lord Qin thinks he's powerful and can do whatever he wants in Heaven's End God Nation. Since he couldn't frame me, he's going to attack me in anger. Since that's the case, don't blame me for being impolite. If I accidentally kill you later, you only have yourself to blame. Don't blame me." As his voice fell, his entire body burst forth with soaring battle intent. His right hand pinched his sword fingers, and an incomparably fierce aura was brewing in his body. He was ready to launch a thunderous attack at any time. Seeing this scene, the surrounding tyrants were all shocked and astonished. Everyone's eyes were focused on Ji Tianqing. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Whispers and discussions also broke out in the crowd. Where did this kid come from? How dare he be so arrogant? Yes. He knows that Lord Qin is the inspector of the immortal guards, but he is not afraid at all. He even said that he would kill Lord Qin. How audacious. From what I can see, this person is still very young. He must have just broken through to the martial sage realm and does not know how powerful Lord Qin is. Lord Qin is a veteran 7th stage realm martial saint. I'm afraid he'll be defeated in 2 or 3 moves. Lord Qin's position is high and powerful. Normal people don't dare to offend him. Moreover, the person standing beside Lord Qin is the eldest divine son, Yuan Zhen, the future master of Heaven Extinction Holy Kingdom. This kid is openly provoking Lord Qin. He obviously doesn't take Yuan Zhen seriously. If they really fight, it will be a big joke. Wouldn't it prove that Heaven Extinction Holy Kingdom is unreasonable and oppressive? From what I can see, the eldest divine son will definitely stop them. He will not let them fight. As the various tyrants were discussing secretly, they glanced at Yuan Zhen to see how he would react. However, Yuan Zhen lowered his head calmly and looked as if he was deep in thought. He did not have the slightest intention to stop them. At the same time, Lord Qin was unable to restrain his anger and attacked. "Arrogant kid, go to hell." With a thunderous roar, he threw out 2 mountain-sized flaming fist radiants toward Ji Tianqing. The flaming fist radiance's aura was extremely violent and contained the power to destroy the heavens and earth. It lit up the night sky within a radius of 200 miles. The nearby tyrants could feel the scorching heat and could not help but retreat 100 feet away to avoid being affected by the aftershocks. Ji Tianqing looked at the flaming fist radiance that was coming toward him without the slightest bit of fear. He raised his fists indifferently and punched back with all his might. Star-shattering fist. He threw out 2 silver flaming fist radiance with all his might and smashed toward Lord Qin with cold and mighty star energy. Bang! Bang! The silver and red flaming fist radiance collided in the night sky and let out 2 deafening bangs. The 4 flaming fist radiance collapsed at the same time and burst into light fragments that filled the sky. It created a violent shockwave that spread out in all directions. The various tyrants looked fearful and quickly cast defensive spells to block the shockwave that was coming toward them. Ji Tianqing and Lord Qin's exchange of blows was a draw. Neither of them had the upper hand. Mr. Qin froze on the spot. He narrowed his eyes with a serious expression, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. The surrounding tyrants were also shocked and looked at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. Cries of surprise could be heard from the crowd. Oh my God! That kid took Lord Qin's attack and was not injured at all. This kid has such terrifying strength. He can fight against Lord Qin. He is so young and he is already a 7th level martial sage. This is impossible. If he really has the strength of a 7th level martial sage, he can't be a nobody. Why haven't we seen him before? This is unbelievable. No wonder he dares to be so arrogant and severely injured by Shao of the Heaven-Breaking Alliance. In an instant, everyone stopped looking down on Ji Tianqing and no longer dared to underestimate him. Even Yuan Zhen, who had been pretending to be in deep thought, suddenly raised his head and looked at Ji Tianqing with burning eyes. Lord Qin was shocked and angry. He also felt ashamed. In his anger, he could not help but take out his magic treasure and use all his strength to fight against Ji Tianqing. At this moment, Yuan Zhen waved his hand and shouted coldly, "Qin Zheng, stop." Lord Qin was still angry. He looked at Yuan Zhen unwillingly and asked, "Your Highness, this person is too audacious. He has disregarded our country's laws, shut up." Yuan Zhen shouted coldly again and said in a dignified tone, "Don't forget that we are here to deal with this matter impartially, not to fight with others. I have always convinced people with reason and will never use my power to oppress others." Lord Qin unwillingly stopped and suppressed his anger. He bowed respectfully and said, "Your Highness is right. I will remember this and will not do it again." Yuan Zhen nodded slightly and looked at Ji Tianqing deeply. He said, "Don't worry. I will not wrong a good person, nor will I let a bad person go. I will deal with this matter impartially and give both parties an explanation." "Huh, is that so?" Chapter 2157. Before Lord Qin had struck, Ji Tianqing had thought that Yuan Zhen was a reasonable person when he saw Yuan Zhen's elegant demeanor. However, it turned out that Yuan Zhen was not a good person. Therefore, Su Mo did not like Yuan Zhen at all. He even felt that Yuan Zhen was hypocritical and disgusting. However, Yuan Zhen was not embarrassed at all. He pretended that he had not heard Su Mo's sneer and continued to ask calmly, "After talking for so long, you still don't know who you are. Given your strength and skills, you are definitely not a nobody." Ji Tianqing said calmly, "A real man does not change his name. My name is Tianqing and I am from Luoshui Holy Kingdom." When Yuan Zhen heard what Su Mo had said, his eyes narrowed and a strange look flashed across them. The surrounding powerhouses were also stunned. Soon after, complicated expressions appeared on their faces. Some of them were enlightened and some of them were shocked. Some of them looked curiously at Ji Tianqing and discussed among themselves. "Ji Tianqing. He is Ji Tianqing. That's not right. There was a rumor in the underworld that Ji Tianqing had just broken through to the martial sage realm. How could he fight against Lord Qin? Demon. This guy is definitely a demon and his strength is unfathomable. I have heard that he led the army to fight against the demon tribe at the northern border of Luoshui Holy Kingdom and defeated them. He must be a powerful person. Not only did I hear that he defeated the demon tribe army, but I also heard that he killed Inspector Tian Shang and formed a deadly feud with the Broken Sky Alliance. No wonder Bai Xiao gathered 50 powerhouses to deal with him. This guy is too powerful. Ho ho ho, it's a pity that Bai Xiao is not as powerful as Ji Tianqing. He did not kill Ji Tianqing to avenge Tian Shang. Instead, he got himself killed. Most of the powerhouses had heard of Ji Tianqing's deeds and legends. The crowd became more curious about Su Mo and their eyes were filled with respect and fear. There were two groups of people in the crowd who were looking at Ji Tianqing with complicated expressions. They were either worried or happy. There were 3 young martial sages from the Luoshui divine nation. Their leader was a woman who was 7 feet tall. She wore a palace dress and a crown made of luan and phoenix gemstones. This woman's face was exquisite and beautiful, and her entire body exuded a noble and elegant aura. Her pair of pitch-black eyes were filled with anxiety and worry. She was the Empress of the White Frost Empire, Lu Baishuang. Although the White Frost Empire had many things to do, it was currently rebuilding its home and recuperating. However, she had already arranged the affairs of the empire and insisted on rushing to Sky City to participate in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. After all, the Sacred Assembly was held once every 50 years and was extremely important. The 2 experts beside Lu Baishuang were both martial sages from the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. One of them was the #1 sect master of the Eastern Waves Empire. He was only 900 years old, and his name was Zhuomingqi. The other person was from the Tianwu Kingdom. He was the sect leader of the Tianjian sect. His name was Mu Changtian. The 3 of them were all from the Luoshui God Nation, so they were naturally worried about Ji Tianqing from the bottom of their hearts. Moreover, Lu Baishuang was also familiar with Ji Tianqing, and the 2 of them had some indescribable experience. Young Master Ji actually offended the Broken Sky Alliance, and even the divine guards of the Heaven and Divine Kingdom. I hope he can avert the danger. Lu Baishuang stared at Ji Tianqing and muttered to himself in a low voice. Zhuomingqi also revealed a worried expression, and said in a low voice, Young Master Ji is the #1 God disciple of the Luoshui Divine Kingdom, and the Heavenly Imperial Guardian. He is very important to the Divine Master. No matter how domineering the Heaven and Divine Kingdom is, they wouldn't dare to punish young Master Ji on their own, unless the Heaven and Divine Kingdom wants to start a war with us. Mu Changtian thought for a moment, and transmitted his voice to the other 2, Holy Emperor Bai Shuang, Brother Zhua, we should advance and retreat together with young Master Ji. If Yuanjin dares to punish him, we must stand out and fight together with young Master Ji. Even if we don't participate in this Divine Martial Sacred Assembly, we must not weaken the Luoshui Divine Kingdom's momentum. Lu Baishuang and Zhuomingqi both nodded without hesitation. In addition to the 3 of them, there was another group of people standing in the night sky to the west. There were only 2 people in this group, 1 tall and 1 short, 1 male and 1 female. The male was a golden-haired youth who looked to be about 30 years old. His face was fair and handsome, and his blue eyes had a pair of golden pupils. He wore a long golden robe, and the chest and sleeves were embroidered with a golden dragon pattern. He also wore a crown on his head. Standing beside him was a little girl who was about 1 meter tall, and looked like she was carved out of jade. The little girl was extremely nimble and cute. She was wearing a small yellow dress, and her chubby feet were bare. She was sitting on a crescent-shaped flying magic treasure. The 2 of them stared at Ji Tianqing, and they were both relieved and happy, but also a little worried. The little girl muttered to herself, I didn't expect that in just a few years, Tianqing would break through to the martial saint realm and catch up with me. This guy is really monstrous. I could tell that he was not ordinary back then, but it's a pity that I couldn't keep him in the God Bestowment Mountain. The golden-haired youth beside her rubbed the little girl's head and said with a smile, Jiu, you're praising yourself. Ji Tianqing is already on par with Qin Zheng, and you call that catching up with you? He has obviously surpassed you. Without a doubt, this cute little girl was Jiu, the youngest daughter of martial god Taihao. Jiu raised her head and glared at the golden-haired youth. She pouted unhappily and said, Humph. Seventh brother, you're mocking me again. Tianqing is a rare genius, and it's natural that he has surpassed me. I'm afraid that when the two of you fight in the void platform, even you won't be his match. I'll laugh at you then. The golden-haired youth glanced at the situation and looked worried. He sighed softly and said, I do want to participate in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly as soon as possible and spar with Ji Tianqing. However, it's still unknown whether he can resolve tonight's matter. Jiu immediately looked worried. She pulled the golden-haired youth's sleeve and pleaded softly, Seventh brother, let's help Tianqing, okay? Yuan Zhen is a hypocrite, and Qin Zheng obviously has bad intentions. They will definitely make things difficult for Tianqing. The golden-haired youth nodded without hesitation and said through voice transmission, Tianqing was once a member of the Divine Martial Kingdom. He has made great contributions to the kingdom and is highly regarded by our father. It's reasonable that we can't just sit by and do nothing. We must help him get out. When Jiu heard this, she smiled and said, Yes, I know that seventh brother is the best. He won't just stand by and do nothing. The golden-haired youth nodded and said through voice transmission, Don't be hasty. Let's observe the situation first. Right at this moment, Yuan Zhen spoke. He looked at Ji Tianqing with shining eyes and said, So you're Ji Tianqing. It's true that hearing about you is not as good as meeting you in person. Meeting you in person is even better than hearing about you. I've heard that you're extremely talented and extraordinary. You don't take the martial artists in the world seriously, and you're extremely arrogant. Chapter 2158. Everyone could hear the sarcasm in Yuan Zhen's words. He was not hinting at anything, but he was clearly saying that Ji Tianqing was arrogant. When the powerhouses heard this, they could guess what Yuan Zhen meant. They could not help but look expectant. Everyone wanted to see how Yuan Zhen was going to deal with Ji Tianqing. With Ji Tianqing's arrogant personality, he would not be so soft. Tonight's matter would be difficult to resolve. Lu Baishuang, Jiu, and the others all understood this and became more and more worried. However, Ji Tianqing looked indifferent. He was not anxious or worried at all. He looked at Yuan Zhen indifferently and sneered. Whether you are arrogant or not depends on who you are talking to. If you are reasonable, you will not be afraid of anything. No matter how big the world is, it is not bigger than reason. Grand Divine Son, don't you think so? Yuan Zhen looked at him deeply and nodded. He sneered. That's right. Everything had to be reasoned with. You came to Skyview City from Luoshui God Kingdom to participate in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. You should abide by the laws of our country. No matter what reason you have, you still went on a killing spree outside the city. You destroyed Chifen Garden, killed 50 powerhouses, and destroyed Bai Zhao's body. You have caused such a terrible consequence. You must give us an explanation. Otherwise, where will our country's face go? Ji Tianqing didn't budge an inch as he retorted, Bai Zhao gathered so many experts to set up an ambush, intending to kill me outside the Sky City. He wanted to kill me first, and I fought back. Does Grand Divine Son mean that I can only bear their assassination but not resist? Yuan Zhen did not dare to admit it. He quickly shook his head and said, I definitely did not mean that. Don't misunderstand. You can protect yourself, but your methods are too cruel. You have caused such a terrible consequence. You must give us an explanation. Explanation. Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and said coldly, "Since Grand Divine Sun wants to interfere in this matter, I will give you face in front of all the powerhouses tonight." Hearing his words, Yuan Zhen's eyes flashed with a hint of complacency. Qin Zheng also sneered complacently. Even the surrounding tyrants were disappointed, thinking that Ji Tianqing was going to give in. This was not like his personality, and he was not as arrogant and despotic as the rumor said. However, what Ji Tianqing said next made everyone dumbfounded. Their faces were filled with astonishment. He pointed at Bai Zhao's soul in the night sky and said to Yuan Zhen in a serious tone, "For the sake of the eldest son of God, I will be magnanimous and not pursue Bai Zhao's crime. I will spare his life. But only this time. If he does it again, no matter who pleads for mercy, I will definitely kill him." Yuan Zhen was stunned. His eyes widened slightly as he stared at Ji Tianqing in astonishment. The sneer on Qin Zheng's face also froze. His whole person froze in place, staring at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. The various tyrants were also at a loss. They did not understand the situation at all. What was going on? Wasn't Ji Tianqing going to give in and apologize to Bai Zhao for Yuan Zhen's sake? He actually dared to say that he would spare Bai Zhao's life for Yuan Zhen's sake. If that was not the case, wouldn't he have killed Bai Zhao long ago? Was this what he meant by giving Yuan Zhen face? The various tyrants looked at each other. When they came to their senses, they could not help but be speechless. As expected of Ji Tianqing, the legendary arrogant and despotic guy, he did not let them down at all. Lu Baishuang, Jiu, and the others in the crowd suddenly smiled knowingly. Based on their understanding of Ji Tianqing, this was Ji Tianqing's style. Yuan Zhen's face became gloomy. He stared at Ji Tianqing sharply and asked in a deep voice, "Ji Tianqing, are you serious?" Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked in return, "What? Do I look like I'm joking?" "You." Yuan Zhen immediately frowned. His face was filled with anger. He gritted his teeth and said, "You're very good." His chest was filled with raging anger. He even had a trace of killing intent. However, under the watchful eyes of everyone, he could only suppress his killing intent. He could not easily reveal it. Moreover, he was deeply trusted and valued by martial god Tianju. He knew many secrets that ordinary people did not know. For example, Ji Tianqing's other identity. Therefore, he could only temporarily suppress his anger and plan for the future. Ji Tianqing ignored his complicated expression and nodded. "I've always been very good. I don't need your concern. If there are no other questions, tonight's matter ends here. Goodbye." After that, he ignored Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng, turned around and was about to leave. Qin Zheng instinctively took a step forward and was about to shout to stop Ji Tianqing from leaving. However, Yuan Zhen raised his right hand and stopped Qin Zheng. Qin Zheng looked at him in confusion and asked through voice transmission, "Your Highness, Ji Tianqing is so presumptuous. Are you just going to let him go like this?" Yuan Zhen was expressionless. He replied through voice transmission, "Qin Zheng, there are some things that you don't understand. Yi Lushui knows better than you. When dealing with Ji Tianqing, you can't be too hasty, and you can't do it in front of everyone." Qin Zheng frowned and thought for a while. He nodded as if he understood. He had made up his mind to ask Yi Lushui when he was free. Seeing Ji Tianqing turn around and fly across the night sky, he was about to leave. The tyrants around were also shocked and disappointed. They whispered to each other and discussed. Ji Tianqing is leaving just like that? Is this over? How could this be? The Grand Divine Sun and Lord Qin came aggressively. In the end, it was all talk and no action. Ji Tianqing's way of doing things is even more arrogant than the rumors say. How could the Grand Divine Sun tolerate it? Why do I feel like something's not right? Something's not right. What's so strange about it? Ji Tianqing is the heavenly imperial guardian of the Luoshui divine nation. He just made a great contribution. How could the grand divine son kill him? That's true. The three divine nations have always been in harmony. If the grand divine son killed Ji Tianqing on his own accord, I'm afraid it would cause a war between the two divine nations. Just as everyone was discussing, a thunderous roar came from the night sky in the north. You want to leave after killing someone from the heaven-breaking alliance? In your dreams. The sudden roar was like a thunderclap, shaking the night sky for hundreds of miles. Immediately, everyone above the ruins turned their heads and looked to the north. Even Ji Tianqing stopped and looked at the night sky in the north. They saw a silver starlight cut through the night sky like a shooting star, speeding toward them at an incredible speed. In just a few breaths, the silver light arrived above the ruins from hundreds of miles away. Swish! After the starlight dissipated, a middle-aged man who was more than 10 feet tall and as brawny as an iron tower was revealed. The man was wearing black dragon scale armor, a scarlet cape and a broadsword as wide as a bench at his waist. He was emitting a fierce and domineering aura. He had a head full of curly brown hair and a dignified square face. His skin was bronze and his eyes were sharp and intimidating. Chapter 2159. Originally, the most powerful person present was the first divine son, Yuan Zhen. However, this domineering middle-aged man's aura was even more powerful than Yuan Zhen's and he seemed to be in control of the entire place. Without a doubt, he was more powerful than Yuan Zhen and had already reached the rank 9 martial sage realm. All the top powers in the night sky focused their attention on the middle-aged man. Some people looked at him curiously, while others recognized his identity and showed a look of surprise. Ji Tianqing, who was outside the crowd, glanced at the middle-aged man and frowned as he tried to recall who he was. The alliance leader of the Broken Sky Alliance, Wu Duantian. His thoughts were immediately pulled back to over 1,500 years ago, to that night of thunderstorms and rain. At that moment, Wu Duantian cupped his fists towards Yuan Zhen and said, "Your Highness, long time no see." Yuan Zhen smiled as he cupped his fists and replied, "Greetings, Alliance Leader Wu." With that, he looked at Wu Duantian carefully and was shocked. It seems that Alliance Leader Wu's seclusion has been fruitful and his divine skills have improved. All the top powers saw that Wu Duantian's strength had reached the rank 9 martial sage realm and they were shocked as they exclaimed, "Oh my God!" Before Wu Duantian went into seclusion, he was still a rank 8 martial sage. Now that he has come out, he has broken through to the rank 9 martial sage realm. Back then, there was a rumor in the mainland that Wu Duantian was the closest to the God realm and could be the first to break through to the God realm. It seems that it is true. The rank 9 martial sage realm is the limit of the martial sage realm and he is half a step to the God realm. He is half a step away from breaking through to the God realm and becoming the 4th martial god in the mainland. Everyone knows that he is crazy about martial arts and they call him the martial madman. Who would have thought that he is the most likely to break through to the God realm? As the top powers discussed, they looked at Wu Duantian with respect and fear. Wu Duantian did not say anything as he lowered his head to look at the ruins below him. Seeing that the once majestic fantastic maple garden had become a pile of debris and the entire mountain had collapsed into ruins, he frowned and his face darkened. Looking behind Yuan Zhen, he saw Bai Zhao's soul floating helplessly in the night sky. Wu Duantian was instantly enraged. Murderous intent surged in his eyes as he growled, "Who destroyed my wonderful maple garden and injured Patrol Bai Zhao?" The night sky was silent. Everyone was silent and didn't say a word. Everyone knew that Yuan Zhen's identity was special. He represented the heaven and divine nation, so he didn't dare to casually punish Ji Tianqing in order to avoid a dispute between the two nations. However, Wu Duantian was different. He was the alliance master of the Broken Sky Alliance and had always acted in an iron-blooded and domineering manner. What's more, Ji Tianqing had killed a member of the Broken Heaven Alliance, so Wu Duantian had the right to avenge them. All the tyrants turned their heads to look at Ji Tianqing, their gazes focused on him. Some looked like they were watching a good show, some sneered at his misfortune, and some looked worried. A few of the experts who were closer to Ji Tianqing retreated, allowing Wu Duantian to look directly at him. Wu Duantian's gaze landed on Ji Tianqing as he growled with murderous intent, "You did it. When I just came out of seclusion, I heard that there was a bastard called Ji Tianqing who killed many experts of the Broken Sky Alliance and even killed patrol envoy Tian Chang. Now, it seems that the brat who doesn't know his place is you." Wu Duantian roared as he walked closer to Ji Tianqing. His entire body exuded a formless aura that pressed towards Ji Tianqing like a landslide, covering the night sky. Seeing that he was about to reach Ji Tianqing, he immediately attacked. With his strength as a level 9 martial sage, once he attacked Ji Tianqing, no one would be able to defend against him. Ji Tianqing was in an extremely dangerous situation. Jiu Jiu, Lu Baishuang and the rest instantly felt their hearts in their throats as they wanted to jump out to stop him. However, at this moment, an unexpected scene occurred. Wu Duantian had just rushed in front of Ji Tianqing when he saw his face clearly and felt his gaze and aura. He was stunned on the spot. His body stiffened as if he had been petrified. He stood in front of Ji Tianqing and stared at Ji Tianqing's face. His eyes were like copper bells as he revealed an expression of seeing a ghost. After being stunned for a moment, he could not help but raise his hand to wipe his eyes. Deep shock and disbelief caused his entire body to tremble, and he couldn't help but cry out in surprise. "No! This is impossible. How can it be you? Didn't you die long ago? How can you still be alive? My eyes must be playing tricks on me, it must be." Wu Duantian, who was still full of murderous intent earlier, had become like this in the blink of an eye. His murderous intent had disappeared and he was filled with fear and terror. His expression was extremely ugly. Seeing his reaction, all the tyrants frowned and looked puzzled. What's wrong with Alliance Chief Wu? Could it be that he knows Ji Tianqing? That's impossible. Alliance Chief Wu has been in seclusion for 200 years and Ji Tianqing has only risen in recent years. But looking at Wu Duantian's expression, it's obvious that he knows Ji Tianqing and he looks very, very afraid of him. That's strange. Who did Alliance Chief Wu think Ji Tianqing is? Oh right. I suddenly remembered a rumor. There was a rumor that Ji Tianqing is the reincarnation of Kenshin. Ji Tianqing? The reincarnation of Kenshin? Which Kenshin? Isn't this too ridiculous? Nonsense. Since ancient times, only one person dared to call himself Kenshin. Who do you think it is? The discussions of the various tyrants naturally also reached Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng's ears. Initially, Qin Zheng thought it was strange that Wu Duantian had suddenly stopped talking. Hearing everyone's discussion, Qin Zheng was enlightened and his heartbeat accelerated. He turned his head to look at Yuan Zhen. Only then did he realize that Yuan Zhen had a well-thought-out posture and a confident smile on his lips. Qin Zheng then realized that Yuan Zhen had known about the rumor for a long time. At the same time, Ji Tianqing frowned and looked at Wu Duantian in front of him. If there's nothing else, I'll leave now. I don't have time to waste with you. His expression and tone were very cold, and he even gave off a feeling of being condescending. Wu Duantian frowned and looked at him, unsure if he was real or not. After hearing his voice, Wu Duantian's body shook and he could not help but shout, "It's you. It's really you. Your appearance, your eyes, the aura of your soul, and your voice. Nothing has changed. Kenshin, you've already been dead for thousands of years. How could you appear again?" Ji Tianqing frowned and said expressionlessly, "Are you crazy? What nonsense are you spouting?" Wu Duantian was not angry after being scolded. Instead, he was even more certain and said excitedly, "Don't try to deny it. I remember everything about you clearly, and I will never forget it. Even if you don't admit it, I won't be wrong. Chapter 2160. Even though Ji Tianqing denied it. However, Wu Duantian swore that he was the sword god, and his words were incomparably certain and absolute. There was a subtle change in the expressions of the tyrants. There were a few veteran martial saints who were fortunate enough to have seen Kenshin's true appearance. They stared at Ji Tianqing and studied him for a while. Their memories were awakened and they nodded secretly. In the crowd, there was another wave of whispers and discussions. Martial Saint Chao Ying, who was wearing a white dress and a Taoist crown, looked at the old man beside her with a puzzled expression. She asked softly, "Master, I remember you saying that you went to Tianzhu Mountain and had the fortune to see Kenshin. Is that true?" The white-haired martial Saint Xingshan looked at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression. He replied softly, "Yes, it is true. Kenshin opened a dojo at Tianzhu Mountain and accepted disciples. Not only did he challenge the martial saints of the various clans, but he also preached martial arts at the dojo at the end of every month. Back then, I traveled thousands of miles to the Pillar of Heaven's mountains to witness the sword god's glory and spar with him. However, after ascending the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, I personally witnessed the battle between the sword god and a martial sage. That martial sage was defeated in less than 3 moves. Therefore, I decided not to challenge him and listen to Kenshin's preaching instead. I have indeed benefited a lot." Speaking of the past, Martial Saint Xingshan had a complicated expression on his face. There was a hint of sorrow in his eyes. Chao Ying's eyes lit up. She asked quickly, "Master, since you have seen Kenshin's true appearance, then this Ji Tianqing in front of you, is he Kenshin?" Martial Saint Xingshan was silent for a while. He nodded and said, "His figure, appearance, gaze, and aura are exactly the same. He is exactly the same as Kenshin. However, the sword god had fallen 1,000 years ago. This was something that everyone knew. After 1,000 years, how can Kenshin appear again? The dead cannot be brought back to life, and Kenshin was no exception. The so-called reincarnation is simply too absurd." Chao Ying continued to ask, "Master, are you saying that Ji Tianqing is only very similar to Kenshin, but he is not Kenshin's reincarnation?" This. The martial saint hesitated and shook his head lightly. "I'm not sure. After all, the world is big and there are all kinds of strange things. Moreover, this person is exactly the same as Kenshin. Apart from himself, I'm afraid no one can tell his true identity." While the mountain-exploring martial saint and Chao Ying were discussing, the other veteran martial saints were also discussing similar topics with the younger generation beside them. Anyone who had met Kenshin was certain that Ji Tianqing was exactly the same as Kenshin. However, the idea of reincarnation was too far-fetched and absurd. It was hard to believe. Outside the crowd, a middle-aged man in a golden dragon robe and a double dragon golden crown stood in the night sky with an indifferent expression. He stared at Ji Tianqing with intense hatred and murderous intent in his eyes. If Ji Tianqing saw him, he would definitely recognize him. He was one of the 6 sacred emperors of the vast divine kingdom, Sacred Emperor Chu Yun. When Ji Tianqing was in the vast divine kingdom, he had forged the sword of the burial of heaven and offered it to Sacred Emperor Chu Yun. In the end, Sacred Emperor Chu Yun gave up the Chu Yun Empire for a fake sword, causing the Chu Yun Empire to almost collapse. When martial god Taihao learned of this, he personally summoned Ji Tianqing and threw Sacred Emperor Chu Yun into the endless dark prison, punishing him to reflect in the dark prison for 100 years. However, for some reason, Sacred Emperor Chu Yun had appeared again in just a few years. Behind Chu Yun's Sacred Emperor stood a white-haired old man in a black robe. The elder's aura was very calm. He held a dark golden book in his left hand and a large black brush in his right hand. He had the demeanor and aura of an otherworldly expert. He was the sacred master of the Chu Yun Empire, the three-talent sage who assisted Sacred Emperor Chu Yun. At that moment, all the powerful people were discussing Ji Tianqing's identity. Even though they recognized that he looked exactly like Kenshin, no one believed that he was reincarnated. Seeing that everyone was hesitating, Wu Duantian was in a dilemma. The first divine son, Yuan Zhen, also pondered with a solemn expression. Sacred Emperor Chu Yun's lips curled into a cold smile as he muttered to himself, "Ha ha ha. My chance is here." Back then, he killed with a borrowed sword. Tonight, I'll kill with a borrowed sword. The three-talent sage frowned slightly and reminded him softly, "Sacred Emperor, all the powerful people are here. The seventh divine son and His Highness Jiao are also here. It's not a good time for you to show yourself. In my opinion, why don't you bear with it for the time being and spread the news later?" Sacred Emperor Chu Yun shook his head and said in a venomous tone, "I don't have the right to participate in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly, but I came all the way to Skyview City just to take revenge on Ji Tianqing. Now that all the martial saints are here, and he has offended the Broken Sky Alliance and Yuan Zhen, now is the best time." With that, he ignored the three-talent sage's advice and walked toward the center of the hall. "Everyone, please listen to me." He passed through the crowd and shouted loudly, immediately attracting everyone's attention. Everyone has seen that Ji Tianqing is exactly the same as Kenshin from 1,000 years ago. Maybe everyone thinks that reincarnation is too absurd. But who is Kenshin? He is the divine king who ruled over thousands of worlds. He must have unimaginable means. So, it's reasonable that Kenshin can come back from the dead. If you don't believe me, I can show you proof that Ji Tianqing is Kenshin's reincarnation. Great Emperor Chu Yun's words reverberated through the night sky within a 100-mile radius. More than 30 groups of tyrants and hundreds of powerhouses from different countries were all shocked and looked at him with anticipation. Ji Tianqing turned his head and looked at Sacred Emperor Chu Yun sharply. When he saw Sacred Emperor Chu Yun's face, he frowned and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Damn it! Isn't Sacred Emperor Chu Yun imprisoned in the boundless dark prison? Why is he here? The seventh deity and Jiao also turned to look at Sacred Emperor Chu Yun. When the two of them realized that it was Sacred Emperor Chu Yun who was kicking them when they were down, their expressions changed and anger flashed in their eyes. Jiao stared at Sacred Emperor Chu Yun angrily and shouted, "Yan Chu Yun, what nonsense are you talking about?" The seventh deity also stepped forward and said coldly, "Sacred Emperor Chu Yun, what happened tonight is a dispute between Luoshui Holy Nation in heaven and Holy Nation. It has nothing to do with the vast Holy Nation. You just have to watch from the sidelines. If you dare to talk nonsense again, I won't let you off easily." Taihao Yinqi was highly regarded and trusted by martial god Taihao. He was also the most outstanding genius among the deities. His identity and words carried a lot of weight in the vast holy nation. Sacred Emperor Chu Yun was prepared. He bowed to the seventh deity and Jiao and said calmly, "Yan Chu Yun greets Yinqi and Jiao." Chapter 2161. Holy Emperor Chu Yun's attitude was neither servile nor overbearing, and his tone was confident. The powerful people of the various countries had their own conclusions. Everyone believed Holy Emperor Chu Yun's words and had high hopes for him. As for the seventh Shenxi and Jiao, everyone could tell that the two of them were obviously protecting Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing glanced at Holy Emperor Chu Yun before turning to look at the seventh Shenxi and Jiao. He nodded at the two of them. He had not expected Taihao Yinqi and Jiao to come to Wangtian City as well. Now that the two of them had stepped forward to speak up for him, he had noticed their presence. Taihao Yinqi and Jiao nodded at him with an encouraging and comforting look. On the other side, Wu Duantian, Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the rest were still hesitating. Now that they heard Holy Emperor Chu Yun's words, the three of them looked at Holy Emperor Chu Yun with hopeful eyes. Yuan Zhen nodded at him and said with a smile, since Holy Emperor Chu Yun has good intentions and wants to help us resolve tonight's matter, I'm very grateful. I wonder if Holy Emperor Chu Yun has any evidence. Please show it. Wu Duantian looked at Holy Emperor Chu Yun with anticipation and said excitedly, I will remember your kindness in my heart. Holy Emperor Chu Yun had predicted that Wu Duantian and Yuan Zhen would want to know the truth, which was why he had stepped forward. Now that Wu Duantian and Yuan Zhen had taken the bait, he was very pleased. He looked at the tyrants around him and said in a loud voice, I believe everyone knows that when the sword god became famous, he had a divine sword with him that never left his side. That sword is called the Burial of Heaven. Everyone should still remember what that sword looks like. Now, the sword that Ji Tianqing is using is also a dark and cold treasure sword, which is exactly the same as the Burial of Heaven. Everyone was shocked by Saint Emperor Chu Yun's words. Many of the powerful people had complicated looks in their eyes. Chu Yun Divine Emperor didn't give up. He pointed at Ji Tianqing and continued, he looks exactly the same as Sword God. If it's just a coincidence, Sword God won't give up. Then, the sword he used was the same as the legendary Burial of Heaven. Could this be a coincidence? How could there be so many coincidences in the world? Therefore, the truth and the answer are on the verge of being revealed. I believe everyone should understand by now. After saying that, Chu Yun Saint Emperor cupped his hands towards Yuan Zhen and Wu Duantian and left with a smile. The way the tyrants looked at Ji Tianqing changed. Yuan Zhen's expression grew colder and colder, and there was an imperceptible sneer in the depths of his eyes. Wu Duantian fell into silence as he stared at Ji Tianqing. His chest heaved up and down rapidly. It was obvious that his emotions were surging and his thoughts were unstable. Lu Baishuang, Mu Changtian, and Zhuo Mingqi were astounded too, as they found it unbelievable. However, after the three of them regained their senses, they became even more worried for Ji Tianqing. They knew very well what the news of Ji Tianqing being Kenshin's reincarnation meant. This would definitely bring endless calamity and danger to Ji Tianqing. Regardless of whether or not he was Kenshin's reincarnation, this news would cause a huge uproar and shock the entire Shenwu continent. He would definitely be caught in the center of the maelstrom, standing at the heart of the storm and becoming the target of public criticism. Taihao Yinqi and Jiujiu were also shocked, and they looked at each other with complicated expressions. The two of them were shocked by Ji Tianqing's identity, but they were also worried about his safety. At this moment, Lu Baishuang stepped forward without hesitation and said in a sonorous tone, what Holy Emperor Chu Yun said just now was only his side of the story. This is a false accusation against Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing's strength is extremely high, and he has always used qi to control his sword. When has he ever used a treasure sword? Everyone, don't listen to Holy Emperor Chu Yun's nonsense. He must have some enmity with Ji Tianqing, which is why he is deliberately slandering and framing him. Lu Baishuang had seen Ji Tianqing use a sword before, and she had also noticed that pitch-black treasure sword. However, at this juncture, she did not care whether or not that sword was the sword of the Burial of Heaven. She only wanted to help Ji Tianqing defend himself. She did not want to see Ji Tianqing become the target of public criticism, and she was even more unwilling to see Ji Tianqing being persecuted. However, just as she finished speaking, Bai Zhao's spirit, who was beside Wu Duantian, let out an indignant roar. Liar! You are lying! When Ji Tianqing fought with me just now, he clearly used a pitch-black treasure sword, and it was exactly the same as the legendary sword of the Burial of Heaven. Ji Tianqing is Kenshin's reincarnation. If that is not the case, how can he be so powerful? He has just broken through to the martial sage realm not long ago, and yet he was able to defeat me and kill Inspector Tian Shan. This is the only explanation that makes sense. Bai Xiao was the victim, and his physical body had been destroyed by Ji Tianqing. As such, his words were the most credible. The various top powers would not doubt his words. In this way, Ji Tianqing's true identity was confirmed. He was Kenshin's reincarnation. Kenshin, who had fallen 1,000 years ago, had really been reborn. In an instant, the night sky was silent, and one could hear a pin drop. Everyone's expressions and eyes were filled with shock, astonishment, excitement. Everyone's gaze was focused on him. Yuanzhen looked at him with a faint smile and said in a mocking tone, "I did not expect you to hide your strength so well. No wonder you are so powerful, breaking through to the martial sage realm at such a young age, and even defeating stronger opponents. I see. Kenshin, you are indeed the #1 genius, the most legendary person in the world." Qin Zheng chimed in with a mocking sneer, "He, everyone present tonight is truly fortunate to be able to witness the rebirth of the sword god of this generation with their own eyes. Logically speaking, most of us here are Kenshin's juniors. Come, let's bow to Kenshin, shall we?" Although Qin Zheng had said so, none of the top powers dared to move. Even a fool could see that Yuanzhen and Qin Zheng's attitude towards Kenshin was not one of respect and admiration. Ji Tianqing was in an extremely dangerous situation. However, his expression remained calm, and he did not admit nor refute. He looked at Wu Duantian indifferently and said, "Wu Duantian, this is between me and the Broken Sky Alliance, and it has nothing to do with other people. You have already wasted too much time, and I only have one question for you. How do you intend to settle this matter?" "This." Wu Duantian frowned and glanced at Su Mo cautiously, unable to make up his mind. If it were anyone else who had such a deep grudge with the heaven-shattering alliance, he would definitely kill them on the spot to take revenge. However, Su Mo was the #1 god disciple of Luoshui Holy Kingdom, the heavenly imperial guardian, and the reincarnation of the famous Kenshin. When he thought of the two words Kenshin, he could not help but recall the scene from 1,000 years ago. It was a rainy night. Chapter 2162. What had happened that night was Wu Duantian's nightmare. It was a shame that he could not get rid of for the rest of his life. It was also the turning point of his rebirth, the turning point of his rise in adversity. He would never forget the scene of that night for the rest of his life. Therefore, if he really had to make a move against Kenshin, he would feel fear and trepidation from the depths of his soul. Yuanzhen, who was the closest to him, could naturally see his hesitation and fear. Yuanzhen pretended to cough and said solemnly, "Alliance Master Wu, although this is my country's territory, this matter is between the Broken Sky Alliance and Ji Tianqing. You should be the one to deal with it, and it is not appropriate for me to overstep my boundaries. I believe that Alliance Master Wu already has an answer in his heart. Naturally, you will not tarnish the Broken Sky Alliance's reputation, nor will you disappoint the 100,000 members of the Broken Sky Alliance." On the surface, Yuanzhen looked like he had nothing to do with this matter, and what he said was also reasonable. But in reality, he was hinting to Wu Duantian that killing Ji Tianqing was imperative. Otherwise, not only would the Broken Sky Alliance's reputation be tarnished, but the 100,000 members of the alliance would also be disillusioned. From today onwards, Wu Duantian and the Broken Sky Alliance would lose all face, and they would become the laughingstock of Shenwu continent. Wu Duantian naturally understood Yuanzhen's meaning. In reality, he was already riding a tiger and could not back down. He finally stopped hesitating and made up his mind. He said in a low voice, "Ji Tianqing, as the saying goes, a life for a life, and a debt must be repaid. No matter who you are, no matter what methods you have. You killed over 100 of our alliance's elites, killed Inspector Tianshang, and heavily injured Inspector Bai Shao. This is an unforgivable blood feud. As the alliance master, I can only seek justice from you in front of all the heroes tonight." With that, a golden light flashed in his palm, and a dark golden treasured blade appeared. His entire body burst forth with a towering battle intent, and he immediately locked onto Ji Tianqing's spirit aura. "Ji Tianqing, make your move. Tonight, you and I will settle our grudges here, and we will be responsible for our own deaths. Regardless of the outcome, your grudge with the Broken Sky Alliance will be written off. Wu Duantian's voice was cold and stern, causing the temperature of the night sky to drop to freezing point. Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng's eyes contained a trace of a faintly discernible sneer, an attitude of watching a good show. Saint Emperor Chu Yun, who was at the periphery of the crowd, looked smug as he sneered. Humph. Ji Tianqing, oh Ji Tianqing, you're doomed this time. You're dead for sure. As for the other tyrants, their faces were filled with excitement and anticipation. Their eyes were bright. Everyone wanted to see with their own eyes what the Kenshin reincarnated Ji Tianqing was capable of. Facing Wu Duantian, a half-step divine expert, would he be able to continue creating miracles? At this moment, a clear and angry shout rang out. Wu Duantian. Ji Tianqing is the #1 god disciple of our Luo River god nation, a heavenly imperial guardian personally bestowed upon him by the Luo River god lord. What qualifications do you have to force him to duel with you? Is the Broken Sky Alliance so arrogant that they don't even care about the Luo River god nation and the Luo River god lord? Hearing this, everyone turned their heads to look. They saw Lu Baishuang taking the lead and walking to Ji Tianqing's side, looking coldly at Wu Duantian. Following closely behind her were Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian. The three martial sages from the Luo River god nation were clustered around Ji Tianqing. It was obvious that they wanted to advance and retreat with Ji Tianqing. Immediately after, another man's sonorous and powerful voice sounded. Ji Tianqing was also the #1 god disciple of the vast god nation. He had made great contributions to our nation and was highly regarded and trusted by our father. I'm Taihao Yunqi and my sister Jiujiu. I'm willing to advance and retreat with Ji Tianqing. As the voice rang out, Shenxi Yunqi and Jiujiu walked out from the crowd and stood beside Ji Tianqing. Taihao Yunqi was very confident and elegant. He looked at Wu Duantian calmly and said in a resolute tone, if Alliance Chief Wu is unwilling to give me face and insists on killing Ji Tianqing for revenge, then come at me with all you've got. I'm not that talented, but I'd like to experience Alliance Leader Wu's skills. Taihao Yunqi and Jiujiu were the most favored daughters of the martial god Taihao. They represented the vast god nation. No one had expected that the two of them would step forward and go against the Broken Sky Alliance for Ji Tianqing. It was understandable that Lu Baishuang and the other two would help Ji Tianqing. After all, they were all from the Luo River god nation. However, no one had expected that Ji Tianqing would have such a close relationship with the vast god nation. In an instant, the atmosphere became complicated and oppressive. As the various powerhouses discussed among themselves, Wu Duantian's expression turned solemn and he was hesitating again. Yuan Zhen secretly clenched his fists and his heart was filled with anger. Originally, Wu Duantian was about to kill Ji Tianqing. His plan to kill with a borrowed knife was about to succeed. However, in the blink of an eye, his plan was ruined. He hated Taihao Yunqi and Jiujiu to death and scolded them for being nosy. Wu Duantian frowned and coldly glanced at Lu Baishuang and Taihao Yunqi. He asked in a low voice, Are you trying to threaten this lord? Do you think you can force me to take a step back because you have more people? Lu Baishuang said coldly, It's not that we have more people, but we hope you can consider the consequences. Do you want to kill Ji Tianqing? God Lord Luo River will definitely punish you. Jiujiu said with a face full of anger, Alliance Leader Wu, we know Ji Tianqing's character better than you do. He killed your Broken Sky Alliance's people because he was forced to protect himself. Don't ruin the Broken Sky Alliance's great future because of a moment of anger. Think about your 100,000 sect members, think about your 1,000 years of hard work. Stop. A threat. This was a blatant threat. Wu Duantian was so angry that he laughed. He pointed his saber at the crowd and shouted, Good. Very good. You dare to use the Luo River God Kingdom and the vast God Kingdom to pressure me. You protect Ji Tianqing, but but do you think the people he killed deserve to die? Taihao Yinchi said expressionlessly, Alliance leader Wu, you know best whether your subordinates deserve to die or not. As for the rest, you don't have to say anything. You only have two choices now. You can either give up or fight with us. You will be responsible for your own life. Wu Duantian was so angry that his face twisted. He shouted with a murderous aura, impossible. As the alliance leader, how can I just sit by and watch my people get killed? Since all of you are working together, don't blame me for being impolite. As soon as he finished speaking, his body burst into flames and he was about to attack the crowd. The faces of the various tyrants changed and they could not help but cry out. Has Wu Duantian gone mad? No matter how strong he is, he can't win against 6 martial saints. Moreover, Taihao Yinchi and Jiujiu are the children of the vast God Lord. If Wu Duantian dares to hurt them, he is definitely courting death. Just as the crowd was discussing, Ji Tianqing finally spoke. Chapter 2163. Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, Wu Duantian put down his saber. He looked at Ji Tianqing with a sharp gaze and sneered, What? You don't have the face to ask them to block the saber for you. He. That's right. You are the supreme Kenshin. How can you hide behind others and rely on their protection? Ji Tianqing ignored him and turned to Lu Baishuang, Taihao Yunqi, Jiujiu, and the rest and bowed. Thank you all for stepping forward and helping me. I am extremely grateful. However, I will take responsibility for my own actions. I will still have to deal with this matter. Thank you for your kindness, but please go back. Lu Baishuang could not help but stare at him and said worriedly, Young Master Ji, now is not the time to be stubborn. If we join forces, Wu Duantian will not be able to do anything to us. Jiujiu tugged at his sleeve and said worriedly, Tianqing, Wu Duantian is a half-step to divine realm martial artist. You have just broken through to martial sage realm not long ago. You should not fight with him. Don't think that you are dragging us down. We are willing to do this. Don't worry, we will not let him hurt you. Taihao Yinchi hurriedly nodded and wanted to persuade him as well. However, he had already made up his mind. After bowing to everyone, he turned to Wu Duantian and said, Wu Duantian, there is something that you should know. With our current status and strength, I can't kill you and you can't kill me. You don't even dare to kill me. Hence, there is no need to fight to the death. It is a waste of time. I have a suggestion that you can consider. Wu Duantian agreed with his suggestion and asked coldly, What suggestion? Ji Tianqing said indifferently, I will take 3 of your attacks and not retaliate. I will not use any treasures. I will be responsible for my own life and death. After the 3 attacks, we will forget about all our previous grievances. Hearing his words, Wu Duantian's eyes widened and he asked in disbelief, You will take 3 of my attacks and not retaliate or use any treasures. Are you sure? I am sure. Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly. Lu Baishuang, Jiujiu, and the rest felt their hearts in their throats. No. Young Master Ji, how can you be so reckless? Lu Baishuang grabbed his arm and anxiously said, What's the difference between this and suicide? Absolutely not. We will never agree to it. Taihao Yinchi and Jiujiu hurriedly shook their heads, anxiously trying to dissuade him. Tianqing, Wu Duantian is already half a step into the divine realm. How could you possibly receive 3 of his moves with your bare hands? Ji Tianqing, what you're doing is no different from courting death. What's the point? Lu Baishuang, Jiujiu, and the others were not the only ones who were worried. Even the various tyrants were filled with shock as they let out low cries. This is too ridiculous. Receiving Wu Duantian's 3 moves without using any treasures. Wouldn't they be blasted into smithereens? Ji Tianqing is probably overconfident this time. His opponent is Wu Duantian. You're confident and arrogant enough. Unfortunately, you're destined to have a tragic ending. Even if he uses his Dharma treasure, he might not be able to block 3 moves, let alone without it. Almost everyone felt that Ji Tianqing's suggestion was no different from suicide. Only Yuanzhen frowned and thought for a while. He sneered and said, Ji Tianqing, your suggestion is not appropriate. You've killed so many people from the Broken Sky Alliance and even destroyed Inspector Bai Zhao's body. With such a tragic outcome, you want to resolve it with just 3 moves from Alliance leader Wu. You want to compensate for the lives of so many people. Isn't this too easy? Qin Zheng hurriedly nodded in agreement and said loudly, Your Highness is right. From what I see, you'll need at least 10 moves. As soon as he said that, Lu Baishuang, Jiujiu, and the others all glared at Qin Zheng with murderous intent. The various tyrants also revealed strange expressions. Their views towards Qin Zheng and Yuanzhen had changed greatly. This kind of despicable person who fanned the flames and added insult to injury was the most despicable. Any magnanimous martial artist would not do such a thing. Wu Duantian was also forthright. He immediately waved his hand and said, All right. Ji Tianqing, seeing that you're so sincere, I'll agree to your suggestion. I'm 8 levels higher than you. 3 moves it is. Killing you, 3 moves are enough. As soon as he said that, this matter was decided. It was useless for anyone to say anything. Everyone retreated to the sides and watched the battle from afar. In the night sky above the ruins, only Ji Tianqing and Wu Duantian were left. Wu Duantian silently channeled his mana. His entire body lit up with dark red flames. His aura rose steadily until it reached its peak. The surrounding 200 miles of night sky was lit up by the dark red flames. He was like a blazing ball of light, more dazzling than the stars in the night sky. Ji Tianqing stood in the night sky 10 miles away from him. His expression was calm and indifferent. His hands were behind his back. There was no glow of mana on his body. He did not even condense a mana shield. He looked as if he was defenseless. After a while, Wu Duantian's aura reached its peak. He suddenly shouted, Ji Tianqing, take this. The first move, martial reversal of the universe. As he shouted coldly, he held the dark golden treasured saber with both hands. He suddenly slashed out 1,000 feet long golden saber radiance. The saber radiance was as bright as the sun. It carried the power to split the heavens and earth as it slashed down from the night sky. The power of this saber radiance was extremely terrifying. Even the dark night sky was torn apart by the saber radiance. A wide crack appeared in the void. Seeing this scene, everyone present widened their eyes, revealing a face full of shock. Oh my God! He actually slashed the void with one saber radiance. As expected of a half-step to divine realm expert. It's too terrifying. How can a body of flesh and blood withstand such unparalleled power? I'm afraid only a martial god expert can block this saber radiance. It's over. Ji Tianqing is definitely going to die. Such thoughts flashed through the minds of countless people. Lu Baishuang and Jiujiu's hearts were in their throats. They were so worried that they even forgot to breathe. In the next moment, the golden saber radiance that could split the heavens and earth finally hit Ji Tianqing. His figure was immediately drowned by the saber radiance. However, the strange thing was that there was no muffled sound or explosion. The terrifying saber radiance seemed to have slashed through the air. It passed through Ji Tianqing's figure and slashed down to the ruins below. After the saber radiance slashed through, Ji Tianqing's figure was split into 2 halves from the middle. There was no blood splattering, nor was there any flesh flying. The 2 halves of the figure collapsed and dissipated on the spot like bubbles. Then, the saber radiance slashed down on the ruins with a loud bang, causing an earth-shattering explosion. Suddenly, endless soil and stones burst out, covering the night sky. The ground within a few hundred miles shook violently, and countless ravines cracked open. Even Wangtian city, which was thousands of miles away, was shaken more than a dozen times. The incomparably violent golden shockwave spread out in all directions, sweeping through a radius of 500 miles. The various experts were further away, but they still had to use defensive secret techniques to resist the power of the shockwave. Chapter 2164. Just the aftershock of Wu Duantian's saber chi was enough to severely injure the experts who were dozens of miles away. One could only imagine the terrifying power that Ji Tianqing, who was locked onto by the saber chi, had to endure. All the tycoons widened their eyes and stared at the situation in the field. Everyone wanted to know how Ji Tianqing ended up. Was he killed by Wu Duantian's saber chi, or was he severely injured? The crowd could not figure out how Ji Tianqing managed to block the saber chi without using any Dharma treasures. The power was too terrifying. After a while, the dust and golden light that covered the sky finally dissipated. The night sky regained its clarity. Wu Duantian's figure appeared and stood proudly in the night sky. 10 miles away from him, Ji Tianqing, who was in a white robe, stood unharmed in the night sky. Seeing this scene, many experts were stunned for a moment, and all of them revealed looks of disbelief. Oh my God! How is this possible? He blocked Alliance Master Wu's saber chi and is unharmed. This is unbelievable. How did he do it? Did everyone see it clearly? Did he use any Dharma treasures? I saw it clearly. He definitely did not use any Dharma treasures. He did not even dodge. This is a miracle. Not only were the powerhouses stunned, but Yuanzhen, Qinzheng, and the great emperor of Chuyun frowned and looked incredulous. As for Wu Duantian, he looked at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression. His eyes were filled with doubt. He could not understand. That saber chi had locked onto Ji Tianqing's spiritual soul aura. No matter what, Ji Tianqing could not have dodged it. In the end, he was not injured at all. How did he do it? At this moment, Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly, Wu Duantian, the first move is over. It's time for you to make your move. Wu Duantian immediately came to his senses and said angrily, don't be so smug. You were lucky enough to dodge my first move. Don't even think about dodging my second move. As soon as he finished speaking, he held the dark golden saber with both hands. His entire body surged with golden light that soared into the sky. In an instant, he slashed out thousands of golden saber lights. Duanren border. Following his furious roar, thousands of golden saber lights danced like snowflakes, filling the night sky within 100 miles. Every blade light contained an incomparably fierce and sharp aura that seemed to be able to cut through all obstacles. Thousands of saber lights danced in the air, completely sealing off the night sky. Even if Ji Tianqing had heaven-defying means, it was impossible for him to escape the strangling of the saber light. All the tyrant's expressions changed abruptly. They hurriedly retreated dozens of miles away from the range of the golden saber net to avoid being affected. As for Ji Tianqing, he was still standing in the same spot with an indifferent expression. He had no intention of dodging or resisting. Only when the countless blades were about to land on his head did he raise his hands and form a profound incantation. Turbid Heaven's secret art. Shwa! With a flash of white light, he disappeared on the spot. It was as if he had never existed. The overwhelming saber lights slashed down, but they all hit empty air, tearing countless void cracks in the night sky. At this moment, Ji Tianqing no longer existed in this world. All the tyrants present, regardless of whether they used their eyes or divine consciousness to search, could not find any trace of him. However, he was omnipresent. This was because he had become one with the heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth were him, and he was the heavens and the earth. Shwa shwa shwa. Thousands of golden saber lights danced in the night sky. They continued to strangle each other for 10 breaths of time before gradually dissipating. Ji Tianqing's figure appeared again, and he was still unharmed. His robe was as white as snow, and his long hair was draped behind his head. There was not a single strand of hair that was messy. Wu Duantian stared at the night sky, dumbfounded. His eyes were filled with horror. In the night sky 100 miles away, Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the other tyrants were also filled with shock. They could only find it unbelievable. The crowd was silent for a moment before bursts of exclamations and discussions erupted. This is impossible. How could he have dodged this secret skill? Under the saber light, the night sky within 100 miles was torn apart. How could he have remained unharmed? This is too strange. How did he do it? Even if he used a sacred weapon, it would not be so strange. Ji Tianqing's skill is really unbelievable. 2 moves have already passed. I wonder if Alliance leader Wu's third move will be able to kill him. The crowd's discussions reverberated in the night sky. Wu Duantian's face was ghastly. His eyes were filled with fear and respect. In a trance, his thoughts returned to the rainy night more than 1,000 years ago. Back then, Kenshin had used such an unfathomable and unbelievable skill to easily dodge his ultimate attack. He would never forget what happened that night. Tonight, the scene from the past was happening again. His hands that were holding onto the saber could not help but tremble. His heart was filled with unyielding and grief. No. I will never let that happen again. Back then, I was weak. Now that I am half a step into the divine realm, I must avenge my past humiliation. Wu Duantian murmured to himself as he gripped his treasured saber tightly with both hands. His voice was as loud as a bell as he shouted, Ji Tianqing, take this. As he spoke, his entire body ignited with a dark golden flame. A destructive aura surged out from him. He did not hesitate to use a forbidden secret skill and burn 50 years of cultivation to increase his strength by 3 times. At this moment, his body expanded to a height of more than 30 feet. He was like a giant shining with golden light. He held on to the saber with both hands and stared at Ji Tianqing. He roared at the top of his lungs, divine saber. Heaven shattering. Following his roar, he held on to the dark golden saber with both hands and slashed down with all his might. Suddenly, a giant golden saber that was thousands of feet long appeared. This giant golden saber light was even more dazzling than the sun. It lit up the night sky within a few hundred miles. The air in this area was also compressed by the saber light. The spiritual chi of heaven and earth was also absorbed by the saber light. Before the saber light descended, a terrifying suppressive force had sealed the area within a radius of 200 miles. Such a powerful saber could really destroy the heavens and the earth and cut everything in half. At this moment, everyone's hearts were in their throats. They could not take their eyes off the situation. Lu Baishuang, Jiu, and the rest were sweating profusely for Ji Tianqing. They were extremely worried. Swoosh! The giant golden saber slashed down from the sky towards Ji Tianqing's head. The giant golden saber was about to hit Ji Tianqing and cut him in half. At this critical moment, strange ripples appeared in the night sky around him, folding in an intricate manner. With him as the center, the space within a radius of thousands of feet was completely messed up. Bam! The giant golden saber slashed down from the top of his head. However, it brushed past his shoulder and slashed into the ground below. Suddenly, a deep ravine that was dozens of miles long was formed on the flat plain. Chapter 2165. Wu Duantian roared this sentence subconsciously. Then, he regretted it. His chest was filled with anger and humiliation, and the scene of that night appeared in his mind again. A strong sense of terror and fear emerged from the depths of his soul and rushed to the top of his head. His body stiffened on the spot, and his expression was extremely ugly. Such a familiar scene, and it's happening again. He muttered in a daze, and his eyes were filled with fear and self-mockery. That year, I exchanged 3 moves with him, and I couldn't even touch his clothes. But I was proud and arrogant, and thought that I missed. But reality proved that even if I attacked him 30 more times, or even 300 times, I couldn't hurt him at all. Tonight, this scene actually happened again. It's him. It's him. It's definitely him. Other than him, there's no other person in the world who can humiliate me in this way. In the beginning, Wu Duantian was still muttering in a daze. In the end, he couldn't help but roar out, and his voice was filled with respect and fear. Kenshin was a peak that he could never surpass in this lifetime. The night sky regained its clarity. The night sky around Ji Tianqing gradually returned to normal. He was still standing on the spot, unharmed, and his expression was calm and indifferent. No matter how strong Wu Duantian's aura was, or how terrifying his saber technique was, he didn't care. From the beginning to the end, he didn't even move half a step. In the eyes of others, it seemed that Wu Duantian really missed. After all, Ji Tianqing didn't even dodge, and the saber light brushed past him and hit the ground. But the martial saints present all understood that it wasn't Wu Duantian who missed. It was Ji Tianqing's technique that was too amazing. He could actually manipulate the power of space, and cause the space around him to fold in disorder. It seemed that he didn't move from his spot, but in reality, the space was already in disorder. At that time, he was actually in a different space, so how could he be hit? The night sky was dead silent. Everyone was silent, and no one could say a word. Everyone's face was filled with shock and horror. They looked at Ji Tianqing with eyes full of respect. After this incident, no matter how much he tried to deny it, he would not be able to change the fact that he was Kenshin's reincarnation. Everyone was incomparably certain that only the legendary sword god could execute such an unfathomable method. Outside the crowd, Great Emperor Chu Yun recovered from his shock. He clenched his fists in anger and cursed to himself, "Damn bastard. He was actually this monstrous." Even Wu Duantian, a rank 9 martial sage, could not do anything to him. When can I take my revenge? In the crowd, Yuan Zhen's face was as cold as ice, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. I really didn't expect him to be the reincarnation of Kenshin and be so powerful. Even Wu Duantian couldn't do anything to him, so it's even more impossible for me to kill him. It seems that this matter can only be discussed at length and think of another way. Lu Baishuang, Shuamingqi, and Mu Changtian collected their thoughts and wore joyful and excited expressions. Jiu Jiu and Taihao Yunqi could not help but clench their fists as their hearts finally settled down. At the same time, Ji Tianqing looked at Wu Duantian calmly and said in a firm voice, "Wu Duantian, the 3 moves have ended. The grudge between me and the Broken Sky Alliance has ended. I hope you can keep your promise. Otherwise, I don't mind destroying the Broken Sky Alliance. You're on your own now." He glanced coldly at Wu Duantian and turned to fly towards Wangtian City. Wu Duantian stood in the night sky with a cold expression as he looked at Su Mo's departing figure. He pursed his lips tightly and did not say a word. Indeed, he had agreed to Ji Tianqing's suggestion in front of all the tyrants. Now that Ji Tianqing had taken 3 of his moves, he could not pursue the matter no matter what the outcome was. Otherwise, he would be a treacherous and untrustworthy person and would be mocked by the various experts. Moreover, he had used 3 moves consecutively and had not even managed to harm a single strand of Ji Tianqing's hair. This was humiliating enough. Damn it! I have been in seclusion for more than 200 years and finally broke through to the 9th level martial sage realm and became a half-step divine realm expert. Below the 3 martial gods, I can be said to be the number 1. After coming out of seclusion, my name should be known throughout the continent and I should be respected and worshipped by millions of martial artists. However, my reputation has been ruined by him and I have become a laughing stock once again. Kenshin, oh Kenshin, what grudge do I have with you? Will I never be able to escape from your shadow in this lifetime? Wu Duantian thought to himself as his gaze turned cold and his heart was filled with grief and despair. At this moment, Yuan Zhen brought Qin Zheng to his side and comforted him calmly. Alliance leader Wu, you don't have to blame yourself. You have already done your best. Even if you did not get justice for the Broken Sky Alliance, I believe that they will understand. After all, your opponent is the #1 legendary figure in the world. Qin Zheng also smiled and comforted him. Alliance leader Wu, losing to Kenshin is not embarrassing. If he loses to you, he will lose face. Wu Duantian glanced at the two of them and nodded slightly. Thank you for your concern, Your Highness and Lord Qin. Yuan Zhen revealed a playful smile and secretly sent a message. Alliance leader Wu, tonight's matter ends here. You don't have to take it to heart. Next, let's enjoy the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. Although Ji Tianqing is the reincarnation of Kenshin, he has just broken through to the martial sage realm. How can it be easy to return to the peak? There is still a long way to go. He has offended too many experts in the past. Whether he can return to his glory days, let's just wait and see. With that, Yuan Zhen turned and left with Qin Zheng. Wu Duantian was stunned for a moment and immediately understood what Yuan Zhen meant. Instantly, a ray of light flashed across his eyes. What Your Highness means is, unfortunately, Yuan Zhen had already turned and flew away. Halfway through his words, he could only swallow them back into his stomach. After admiring the battle that shocked the world, the tyrants all left with complicated feelings. Those veteran martial sages were immersed in the memory of Kenshin. Ji Tianqing's appearance had evoked their dusty memories. As for those younger generation martial sages, they were extremely wary of Ji Tianqing. Everyone was worried. After all, Ji Tianqing had come for the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. Ji Tianqing returned to Sky City alone and returned to the East Arrival Inn as if nothing had happened. Half of the people in Sky City had been awakened by the battle earlier. Countless martial artists walked on the streets and flew into the night sky, looking in the direction of strange Maple Garden. When Ji Tianqing returned to the East Arrival Inn, those martial artists were still discussing and making wild guesses. He did not care about anyone. After returning to his room, he entered the secret chamber to meditate. The voice of the burial of heaven immediately rang in his mind. Although you did not use me tonight, you have exposed Kenshin's identity. After tonight, this news will spread throughout the continent and can no longer be concealed. Chapter 2166. Plans. What's there to plan? Ji Tianqing closed his eyes and meditated, using his spiritual sense to reply. Many people have seen my face back then. Now that I have appeared in front of the world, I will definitely be recognized. The Sword of Burial of Heaven, the Yellow Dragon, Xia Wudao. These are all my flaws and will definitely arouse suspicion. Since the world will know my identity sooner or later, what difference does it make if it's a day earlier or a day later? Fortunately, I have returned to the martial sage realm. Other than the three martial gods, no one can do anything to me. Burial of Heaven was silent for a while before he said coldly, speaking of which, this is all great Emperor Chu Yun's fault. If he had not pointed out your identity, you would still have a chance to cover it up. Ji Tianqing said indifferently, he's just a clown. Once the matter of the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly is over, he can die. Burial of Heaven quickly reminded him, don't you think it's strange? He was locked up in the endless dark prison by martial god Taihao. How did he come out in just a few years? Don't you suspect that martial god Taihao might be playing tricks behind your back? If you kill great Emperor Chu Yun, how will martial god Taihao explain it to him? Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly, what explanation do I need to give him? Even if great Emperor Chu Yun came out early, it has nothing to do with him. I don't need to care about his face. Whether I give him face or not, it all depends on my mood. Burial of Heaven agreed and said emotionally, sigh, if the three martial gods had to bow down to you in the past, they would not have dared to disobey you. Now that the world has changed, it is hard to predict people's hearts. Everything is unpredictable. Ji Tianqing was silent for a while before he said firmly, Tianju and I have never been on good terms. It is reasonable for him to deal with me. As for Taihao, we are on good terms, but not very close. Even if he has hidden his motives, it is not strange that he has changed his attitude and even attacked me. As for Luo Shui, she is the only one I can trust. Even if 1,000 years have passed, I believe that her heart will not change. Hearing this, Burial of Heaven chuckled playfully, that's right. After all, your relationship isn't ordinary. Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows. He wanted to explain, but he held back. At this moment, the voice of a guard came from outside the door. Young Master, 7th Young Master and 9th Young Mistress request an audience. The young guard outside the door was an expert of the East arrival in, and knew the rules very well. Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and muttered to himself, just as we were talking about Taihao, his children came. Burial of Heaven advised, no matter what Taihao is like, Yinqi and Jiujiu are indeed two good children. They performed well tonight. You should meet them. Ji Tianqing nodded, got up, walked out of the secret room, and sat down in the living room. Then, he said to the guard outside, let them in. As soon as he finished speaking, the door was opened by the guard. Taihao Yunqi and Jiujiu entered the living room one after the other, and came before Ji Tianqing. Jiujiu looked at Ji Tianqing with concern, and asked, Tianqing, are you all right? Did Wu Duantian hurt you? Even if they had not seen each other for many years, Jiujiu was still as innocent and cute as ever. Her clear eyes were filled with concern and worry, without any impurities. Ji Tianqing looked at her and could not help but smile. He gently shook his head, I'm fine. He can't hurt me. That's good. Jiujiu heaved a sigh of relief, and smiled as if relieved of a heavy burden, I didn't expect you to become so powerful in just a few years. How good would it be if you didn't leave Mount God Ceiling back then? Father misses you very much. Before she could finish, she was interrupted by Taihao Yunqi, little sister. Jiujiu turned to look at Taihao Yunqi. Seeing him shake his head slightly, she stopped talking. Taihao Yunqi looked at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression, and cupped his hands in greeting, young Master Ji. I wonder if I can still address you as such. Ji Tianqing glanced at him, and calmly said, Kenshin is long dead. The current me is just Ji Tianqing. Taihao Yunqi smiled and nodded, if that's the case, then Yunqi will put aside your past and boldly call you young Master Ji. Ji Tianqing did not say much, and nodded in agreement. Taihao Yunqi withdrew his smile, and bowed deeply to him, and said in a solemn tone, young Master Ji, I brought my little sister here tonight to apologize to you. Apologize? Ji Tianqing frowned slightly, and asked, when I was in danger, the two of you stepped forward and helped me. I can't thank you enough. What crime have you committed? Taihao Yunqi revealed a guilty expression, and truthfully said, in fact, we are apologizing to you on behalf of Father for what happened to Great Emperor Chu Yun. When you left the vast divine kingdom, Father punished Great Emperor Chu Yun by locking him in the boundless abyss for 100 years. However, at that time, the Chu Yun Empire was in chaos, facing collapse and disintegration, and its territories were annexed by several other empires. Even when my elder brother personally led the divine guards to suppress the situation, and supported the crown prince of the Chu Yun Empire to take over the imperial power, the chaos could not be resolved. A few years later, the chaos became more and more intense, and the various empires frequently went to war, which threatened the stability of the divine kingdom. At this critical juncture, all the royal relatives, nobles, and ministers of the Chu Yun Empire jointly wrote a letter to Father, asking him to pardon Great Emperor Chu Yun's sins. Only when Great Emperor Chu Yun returns to the throne can the chaos in the Chu Yun Empire be suppressed and the balance of the various empires be maintained. Hearing this, Ji Tianqing understood what Taihao Yinchi meant. He nodded slightly, and said in a low voice, "So, after some consideration, your father decided to pardon great Emperor Chu Yun, and allow him to return to the Chu Yun Empire to rectify the chaos?" "That's right." Taihao Yinchi nodded, and added, "However, before father pardoned great Emperor Chu Yun, he had summoned him and severely reprimanded him. However, I did not expect great Emperor Chu Yun to still bear a grudge after stabilizing the chaos in the Chu Yun Empire. When he found out that the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly was about to be held, and that you had broken through to the martial sage realm not long ago, he rushed here to add insult to injury. Young Master Ji, please do not worry, I have already sent a message to father about what happened tonight. I believe father will be furious and punish great Emperor Chu Yun severely, and will not let him make the same mistake again." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows, and looked at Taihao Yinchi with burning eyes. "Are you pleading for him?" Taihao Yinchi was stunned, and quickly shook his head. "Of course not. Great Emperor Chu Yun's character is despicable, and he deserves to be punished. I do not sympathize with him." Ji Tianqing nodded. "In that case, you do not need to let your father punish him. You just need to inform your father and ask him to promote a new great Emperor Chu Yun." Chapter 2167. With Taihao Yinchi and Jiuzhou's intelligence, how could they not understand what Ji Tianqing was trying to say? The two of them immediately understood that Ji Tianqing did not intend to forgive Emperor Chu Yun. Furthermore, Emperor Chu Yun would not be able to return to Taihao Kingdom alive. Jiuzhou did not think too deeply into it. She only felt that it was better for a detestable scum like Emperor Chu Yun to die. However, Taihao Yinchi was highly regarded by martial god Taihao and had been involved in the kingdom's political affairs. He was more thoughtful than Jiuzhou. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Young Master Ji, can't you be lenient? You should know that there are very few martial sages in the kingdom. There were only a handful of martial sages who were capable of taking on great responsibilities and ruling over an empire. It will be difficult to find a suitable successor in such a short time." Ji Tianqing also understood that Taihao Yinchi was not pleading for Emperor Chu Yun. He was just thinking about the stability of the kingdom. Therefore, he said in a calm tone, "Whether or not you can find a suitable successor is a problem for your father to consider. Allowing a scum like Emperor Chu Yun to take charge of an empire will cause more trouble sooner or later. If there is no one, it is not a bad choice for you to take charge of the Chu Yun Empire." "Ah." Taihao Yinchi was stunned. He said awkwardly, "Young Master Ji, I am afraid this is not appropriate. Although I am a martial sage, I am too young. In terms of experience, Big Brother is more suitable than me." Ji Tianqing frowned and said in a low voice, "When Emperor Chu Yun was sent to the boundless dark prison, your big brother led the divine guards to suppress him. However, he was unable to solve the chaos in the Chu Yun Empire. It is obvious that your big brother is not capable enough. You are the most suitable candidate. You don't have to say any more. I will send a message to your father and explain the situation to him personally." Seeing that Ji Tianqing had made up his mind, Taihao Yinchi could not persuade him anymore. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. After hesitating for a while, he cupped his fists and said to Ji Tianqing, "In that case, thank you for your recommendation." Originally, he was here to apologize and appease Ji Tianqing's anger. He wanted to save great Emperor Chu Yun's life. But now that things had developed to this point, it became Ji Tianqing recommending him to be the great emperor of Chu Yun. This was too complicated. Jiuzhou, on the other hand, was overjoyed. She smiled and nodded in agreement. "Tianqing, you really have a good eye for people. Although Big Brother's strength is slightly stronger than Seventh Brother's, Big Brother is not as good as Seventh Brother when it comes to governing a country. If you personally recommend Seventh Brother to Father, Father will definitely seriously consider it." Ji Tianqing smiled gently at Jiuzhou and didn't say anything. Jiuzhou looked around and said worriedly, Tianqing, I'm afraid it's not safe for you to continue staying in this inn after such a big commotion tonight. It just so happens that seventh brother and I have a residence in the city. We brought many guards and set up a powerful defense. Why don't you come with us to stay in that residence and wait for the divine martial sacred assembly to begin? Jiu Jiu and Taihao Yinqi were of noble status and had brought many guards with them. Naturally, their safety was not a concern. If Ji Tianqing stayed with them, no one would dare to do anything to him. However, Ji Tianqing smiled and shook his head. Jiu Jiu, thank you for your kindness. I appreciate it. Jiu Jiu's little face revealed a disappointed expression. She pouted and said, all right, I know you don't want to cause trouble for us, but we really don't care. Since you insist, I won't force you. Taihao Yinqi also said in a serious tone, young Master Ji, if you need our help with anything, just send us a message and it will be fine. You came to Sky Gazing City alone and didn't bring any attendants or guards. We have a lot of people at your disposal. Ji Tianqing shook his head again and said, thank you for your kindness, seventh son, but there's no need. Taihao Yinqi and Jiu Jiu chatted with him for a while more before they bowed and left. Not long after they left, Ji Tianqing was about to return to the secret chamber to meditate. At this time, the guard outside the door reported again, young master, a lady with the surname Liu is here to visit. Surnamed Liu. Ji Tianqing blinked his eyes. His lips curled into a smile as he murmured, it must be her. The burial of heaven also added, who asked you to owe so many love debts? Now the debt collector is here. I'm going to sleep. Don't look for me if there's nothing. After that, it fell into silence and no longer made any sound. Ji Tianqing could not help but roll his eyes. He muttered to himself, love debts. How could there be such a thing? After a while, the door opened with a creak. Liu Baishuang, who was wearing an exquisite palace dress and a jeweled phoenix crown, was the first to step into the living room. Behind her were two young men with extraordinary bearings. They were Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian. The three of them stood in the middle of the living room and looked at Ji Tianqing. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian smiled as they cupped their fists towards Ji Tianqing. I'm Zhuo Mingqi. Greetings, young Master Ji. I'm Mu Changtian. I've heard so much about young Master Ji. I'm so lucky to finally meet you tonight. Ji Tianqing nodded slightly and said, you're too polite. Please sit down and talk. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian sat down, but Liu Baishuang was still standing in the middle of the living room. She looked at Ji Tianqing with a complicated expression. Ji Tianqing looked at her and asked, what's wrong? It's only been a few months. Don't you recognize me? Liu Baishuang glared at him and said, you're the savior of the White Frost Empire, the heavenly imperial guardian of the heavenly empire. Who dares to not recognize you? Ji Tianqing pretended not to see her anger and asked, then why are you staring at me? Did you find that I've become more handsome after a few months? Liu Baishuang couldn't help but roll her eyes and said, I was worried that you wouldn't be able to sleep well after provoking the Heaven End Alliance and the Heavenly Empire. Now that I see that you're still so carefree, I'm relieved. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were stunned and they heard the strange conversation between the two. They looked at each other and felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. They couldn't help but smile. Ji Tianqing waved his hand disapprovingly and said confidently, it's just the Heaven End Alliance. What can they do to me? As for the Heavenly Empire, they won't dare to do anything to me unless they want to provoke a conflict between the two nations. Tell me, what do I have to fear? Liu Baishuang couldn't help but frown and said worriedly, although that's the case, it's easy to dodge a spear in the open but hard to dodge a stab in the dark. I see that Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng are hostile to you. They even want to borrow Wu Duantian's hand to kill you. The day after tomorrow is the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. Yuan Zhen will be hosting the assembly. I'm worried that he will make a move on you and use some tricks. Young Master Ji, the three of us have discussed and decided that we shouldn't stay here for long. Chapter 2168. Lu Baishuang tried to persuade him. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian also tried to persuade Ji Tianqing to give up on the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly and leave Sky City as soon as possible. Once tonight was over, the news would spread the next day. Even if one were to think with their toes, they would know that there would be countless experts rushing over. Kenshin had led the world in the past and suppressed the three martial gods. In the process of his rise, he had offended many experts and forces. Back then, others did not dare to do anything to him because of his reputation and terrifying strength. However, it was different now as he had just become a martial sage. If the various experts and forces wanted to kill him, they would have a chance. However, after Lu Baishuang and the other two finished speaking, Ji Tianqing was still stubborn and insisted on staying. I appreciate your kind intentions, but I have a reason to stay. I know you have good intentions and are worried about my safety. However, you should know that I have already made preparations. Even Wu Duantian, a half-step to divine realm expert, could not do anything to me, let alone ordinary martial sages and forces. As for the three martial gods, they will not kill me personally. Hearing his words, Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi, and Mu Changtian fell silent. The three of them had to admit that Ji Tianqing's words made sense. Moreover, Wu Duantian could not hurt him at all. This was something that everyone had seen with their own eyes. After a moment of silence, Lu Baishuang said, "All right, since you insist on staying, we will not force you. However, I have a request. You cannot stay in this inn and must stay with us. Furthermore, I will also report everything that happened tonight to the Luotian Mountain so that Lord Divine Master will be prepared." Ji Tianqing naturally understood what Lu Baishuang meant, but he pretended not to. He looked at Lu Baishuang in surprise and asked in disbelief, "Are you so anxious? I have not agreed to stay with you and you want to stay with me? Isn't this too casual?" "No, this is an important matter and I have to think about it carefully." Lu Baishuang was worried and anxious and did not react in time. He asked subconsciously, "Agree to what? What is there to think about? I'm doing this for your sake." Ji Tianqing immediately showed a touched expression and said earnestly, "Baishuang, I really didn't expect that your feelings for me would be so deep that you would even disregard your own reputation. It's a pity that I already have a wife and children. Even if you're with me, you won't have any status. Don't you feel wronged?" Lu Baishuang stared at him blankly for a moment, then came back to her senses, and her face turned red. "Ji Tianqing. You shameless bastard, what nonsense are you talking about? You heartless fellow, I don't care if you live or die." She glared fiercely at Ji Tianqing, then turned and left angrily. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were still sitting in the living room with awkward and bitter smiles on their faces. The two of them looked at the calm Ji Tianqing, then looked at Lu Baishuang who flicked her sleeves and left. They couldn't help but think to themselves, there was a rumor in the Divine Kingdom that Holy Emperor Baishuang and young Master Ji seemed to have developed feelings for each other and that their relationship was not ordinary. Now, it seems that it was true. Young Master Ji is the reincarnation of Kenshin. I didn't expect his personality to be so carefree and unrestrained. This is really unexpected. The two of them had heard that Kenshin was the best in the world. He was cold and arrogant and was obsessed with the way of the sword. He had never had any emotional entanglements with any woman. They didn't expect that Kenshin's reincarnation as Ji Tianqing would be so carefree. Wherever he went, he would be surrounded by women. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian looked at each other and muttered in their hearts. However, since Lu Baishuang had left, the two of them could not stay any longer and quickly got up to leave. "Young Master Ji, since you are not willing to stay with us in the Shanghai courtyard, we will not force you. We only hope that you will be careful when you are alone here. Don't fall into the trap of those scoundrels. Young Master Ji, please take care of yourself. We will meet again at the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian said their goodbyes to Ji Tianqing and left together. The living room quieted down. Ji Tianqing stood up calmly and returned to the secret chamber to continue meditating. Not long after he sat down, the voice of the burial of heaven sounded in his mind. To be honest, Lu Baishuang treated you sincerely. It's just that her personality is a bit too straightforward. How could you tease her like that? Those two brats were present. How awkward would it be for Lu Baishuang? Ji Tianqing frowned and said unhappily, didn't you go into hibernation? Why are you still secretly monitoring me? The burial of heaven said in a serious tone, this is not monitoring. I am thinking for your happiness. In your past life, you were all alone and only had feelings for one woman. However, you were unable to marry her. In this life, you cannot repeat the same mistake. You must marry a few more concubines to make up for your regrets. I think that Lu Baishuang is not bad. You should treat her seriously and take her in. Every time you tease her like this, aren't you just pushing her away? Ji Tianqing couldn't help but roll his eyes and said seriously, what kind of fallacy is this? In my past life, I was not able to spend time with Mingyue. In this life, I have to marry a few more concubines. What kind of compensation is this? This is clearly hurting her, okay? Besides, Lu Baishuang and I are innocent. There is no emotional entanglement. Don't try to matchmake us. The burial of heaven said in a low voice, in any case, this is your problem. You can decide for yourself. Right, speaking of Mingyue. I just remembered something. The demon army has already retreated. That silly girl is still staying in the North Underworld Mountain as a spy. You should send her a message as soon as possible and let her leave the North Underworld Mountain. Ji Tianqing nodded and said, yes, the demon army has already retreated. A few demon saints have also almost died. In the short term, the demon army will definitely not cause any trouble. There is not much meaning for her to continue staying in the North Underworld Mountain. She should indeed come back early. However, I can't take the initiative to send her a message in case her identity is exposed. I can only wait for her to send me a message next month. I will then persuade her to come back. The burial of heaven was silent for a moment and asked again, right, you did not go with Jiu or Lu Baishuang. You insisted on staying in this inn. What do you want to do? Ji Tianqing smiled and said with a burning gaze, if I stay with them, it will be inconvenient for me to cultivate and break through. The Divine Martial Sacred Assembly will be held the day after tomorrow. Before that, I still have a lot of things to do. For example, break through to the second level of the Martial Saint realm. So fast. The burial of heaven was also shocked. His tone was full of disbelief. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, there are shackles in every big realm. It takes a lot of time and effort to break through. But I have already broken through to the Martial Saint realm. Breaking through to another small realm is as easy as flipping my hand. Chapter 2169. In a dimly lit secret room. Ji Tianqing sat cross-legged on a white jade array platform, his eyes closed as he cultivated. His entire body was surrounded by a resplendent golden light, and his powerful aura caused the night sky to ripple. He was currently cultivating the 7th level of the Path of Sword Spirit. Once this level was cultivated to perfection, one could gather the power of heaven and earth, summon the divine power of the stars, and hide a sword in the void. He could already break through the void and travel through it. After successfully cultivating the path of the sword heart, one could reach the realm of no sword in hand, sword in heart. As for the path of sword spirit, one could reach the realm of no sword in heart, sword in heaven and earth. Everything in heaven and earth and the power of the stars could be transformed into his sword. With a single thought, he could control his sword to kill enemies from thousands of miles away. This was the power and effect of the path of sword spirit. There was no other sword technique in the world that was more profound and domineering than this. Time passed quietly. Unknowingly, an entire night had passed. It was daybreak, but Ji Tianqing was still immersed in his cultivation, working hard to break through to the second level of the martial sage realm. The seemingly peaceful sky-gazing city was actually filled with turbulent undercurrents. The events of the previous night seemed to have grown wings as they spread in all directions. There were many martial artists in sky-gazing city, and recently, the tyrants of the various divine kingdoms had gathered there. Naturally, the news spread very quickly. In just 1 or 2 days, the news had spread throughout the entire Shenwu continent, and the powerhouses and powers of the various divine kingdoms knew about it. Invisibly, there were hundreds of powers and powerhouses secretly watching East Arrival Inn. Everyone knew that Kenshin Ji Tianqing was staying at East Arrival Inn. Since last night, he had been staying in the inn and had not come out even once. The owner and guards of East Arrival Inn could clearly feel that the atmosphere was not right. Since early morning, many people had poured into the inn, and most of them were experts and powerhouses. The remaining rooms in the inn had all been booked. Even if the price was twice as high as usual, the guests paid without hesitation. Those who didn't manage to book a room also stayed in the inn and refused to leave. They either sat at a table for the entire day or stayed at the entrance of the inn and dozed off in the corner. There were also many martial artists who disguised themselves as peddlers, constantly entering and exiting the taverns to secretly inquire about the situation. The business of the East Arrival Inn had never been as prosperous as it was today. While the innkeeper was making a fortune, he couldn't help but feel worried and anxious. He had also heard the news and knew that there was a big shot staying in his inn. The various martial artists that flooded into the inn were all here for that big shot. He couldn't help but worry that if some forces or experts came to take revenge on that big shot, then his inn would be in danger. The innkeeper spent the whole day in nervousness and anxiety. Fortunately, the various martial artists still restrained themselves, and there were no conflicts. Everyone pretended as if nothing had happened and secretly stared at the movements upstairs. They did not communicate with each other. Until this night. When the lanterns were lit, a majestic aura of magical power suddenly erupted from a room on the 5th floor of the inn. A dazzling golden light soared into the sky from the room, illuminating the night sky for 100 miles. The sudden change alarmed half of the people in Wangtian City. Countless martial artists looked in the direction of the East Arrival Inn, discussing with complicated expressions. There were even many forces and experts who rushed to the East Arrival Inn as fast as lightning to check the situation. As for the hundreds of martial artists in the East Arrival Inn, they all revealed shocked and aghast expressions. After everyone came back to their senses, they all hid in places where there was no one and used various methods to spread the news. Before long, half of the people in Wangtian City knew one thing. That legendary big shot cultivated for a day and night in the East Arrival Inn and actually broke through a realm. However, when the various experts rushed to the East Arrival Inn and secretly searched for traces of that person, they discovered that that person had mysteriously disappeared. Even the many experts guarding the inn didn't know when that person had left. It was simply like a ghost appearing and disappearing. The night was pitch black. Ji Tianqing maintained a state of invisibility, restrained his aura, and sped through the night sky. In a short few dozen breaths, he passed through Wangtian City and arrived at a mountain 800 miles south of the city. There was a town at the foot of the mountain, and dozens of palaces and residences were built on the peak of the mountain. The environment was very quiet and elegant. Even if it was late at night, those palaces and residences were still lit up with specks of light. Ji Tianqing silently flew to the peak of the mountain and released an invisible divine sense, enveloping the entire mountain peak. The situation in the dozens of palaces and residences, even the slightest movement in the wind could not escape his detection. After a short few breaths, his divine sense locked onto a palace, and his figure flashed and arrived above this palace. The palace covered an area of 10,000 feet and was a full 4 stories high. There was also an underground palace floor. This palace was called Hogyuan Palace. It was a temporary residence built by a martial arts force to entertain some special guests. Of course, outsiders could also live in it. It was just that one had to pay a jaw-dropping sky-high price and had to have sufficient strength. The palace was protected by a sacred array, and there were also several guards at night, constantly patrolling the palace. The defense could be said to be tight. However, Ji Tianqing quietly landed in a corner of the palace. It only took him a few hundred breaths to break through the defensive array without alerting anyone. He passed through the gap in the array and silently entered the palace. He walked to the top floor expressionlessly. Even if he walked through the corridors and stairs openly and walked past some guards, no one would notice him. At the same time, the light in the heaven guest room on the top floor was on. In the dignified and elegant study, Great Emperor Chu Yun, who was wearing a golden dragon robe and a crown, was sitting at the desk. He held a jade slip in his left hand and a cup of spiritual tea in his right hand. He was reading the news sent back by the spies, and his brows were tightly knitted together. In the corner behind him, the Grand Tutor in a black robe stood in the shadows, holding a black pen and a golden book with an indifferent expression. After reading the news, Great Emperor Chu Yun crushed the communication jade slip and said angrily, "Damn it. It's been a day, and the news has spread. Everyone in Wangtian City knows about what happened last night. Why hasn't anyone done anything? That useless Wu Duantian has given up. He doesn't even have the courage to take revenge. And that bastard Yuan Zhen, didn't he also want to kill Ji Tianqing? Why hasn't he done anything? Other than him, who else can kill Ji Tianqing?" The Grand Tutor in a black robe said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, it's not that Wu Duantian doesn't want to kill Ji Tianqing, but he can't. As for the other forces, they don't have the strength to deal with Ji Tianqing. Other than the 3 martial gods, I'm afraid no one can kill him. I'm afraid your plan of killing him with a borrowed knife won't work. Now that you've been exposed, with Ji Tianqing's vengeful character, he'll definitely come after you." Chapter 2170. Even though Emperor Chu Yun was filled with resentment and unwillingness, the imperial advisor's words were reasonable. However, the imperial tutor's words were reasonable. After careful consideration, he could only follow his advice. Originally, I wanted to see him being besieged and killed with my own eyes. But now, it seems like my wish is going to be dashed. Imperial advisor, go pack up immediately. We're leaving. Ji Tianqing is cultivating in seclusion in the inn to prepare for the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. He won't have time to care about us. We have to rush back to the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly before it ends. Ji Tianqing won't chase us all the way to the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly for revenge, right? Your Majesty is wise. The imperial advisor could not help but smile when he saw that Emperor Chu Yun had finally relented. Even if Ji Tianqing chases you all the way to the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly, he won't dare to kill you in public. After all, the Chu Yun Empire can't do without your leadership. The Divine Martial Sacred Assembly won't allow him to kill you. Great Emperor Chu Yun revealed a smug look and nodded. Of course. Even if the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly doesn't like me, he has to protect my life in order to maintain the stability of the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. Alright, go and get ready. We'll leave in 30 minutes. The imperial advisor did not say anything else. He cupped his hands and bowed, then went to pack up. Emperor Chu Yun put down his teacup and stretched his arms. He was about to leave. But at that moment, the door of the study suddenly opened with a creak. As the door opened, a gust of cold wind wrapped in a thick murderous aura rushed into the study from the outside. Emperor Chuyun frowned and shouted angrily, "Which bastard is so blind? Do you want to die?" As he spoke, he turned to look at the door of the study. He originally thought that it was a reckless guard who accidentally opened the door to the study. But when he looked at the door, he realized that the situation was very strange. The imperial advisor had just walked to the door and stared at the night sky outside. His body was stiff, and he could not say a word. Emperor Chuyun could only see his side profile, but he realized that his face was ashen and very embarrassed. At the same time, a mocking sneer came from outside the door. "You're only thinking of escaping now. Don't you think it's too late?" Great Emperor Chuyun's body shook when he heard the voice. His expression changed on the spot. "Ji Tianqing." He suddenly stood up and looked coldly at the door. He saw Ji Tianqing, who was dressed in a white robe, striding into the study with a sneer on his face. The imperial advisor was intimidated by his aura and kept retreating until he reached the great emperor of the Chuyun Empire. Ji Tianqing walked into the study and stood 10 steps away from great Emperor Chuyun. He said coldly, "Great Emperor Chuyun, we meet again after so many years." Great Emperor Chuyun's expression was solemn. He looked at him sharply and said in a low voice, "Yes. You didn't expect this, did you? Back then, you caused this emperor to be imprisoned in the boundless black prison, and this emperor was released after a few short years. Do you want to know why?" Ji Tianqing shook his head and sneered, "No matter what the reason is, I don't want to know. You helped me so much last night, and I still haven't thanked you properly. That's why I'm here tonight to give you a big gift." How could great Emperor Chuyun not understand the meaning behind his words? He immediately shook his head and said, "Ji Tianqing, you and I are not friends. This emperor doesn't want your gift. If you come to me for revenge, then I have to warn you. The Chuyun Empire can't do without me. Otherwise, the Chuyun Empire will fall apart, and the vast divine kingdom will be in chaos. This is a situation that Divine Master Taihao doesn't want to see. Do you understand?" Ji Tianqing sneered and asked in a mocking tone, "You mean I can't kill you, or I'll offend Martial God Taihao? It's good that you understand." Great Emperor Chuyun raised his head, and his eyes flashed with pride and arrogance. He said confidently, "I'm sure you know that this emperor is the Divine Master's right-hand man. Although you were once the #1 God's disciple of Mount Gods, you've now joined the Luoshui Divine Kingdom. Therefore, the Divine Master will never give up his right-hand man for an outsider. If you know what's good for you, then go back to Wangtian City obediently. Otherwise, you won't be able to bear the wrath of Divine Master Taihao." Great Emperor Chuyun knew that he was no match for Ji Tianqing, so he used Martial God Taihao's name as a life-saving talisman. However, he didn't expect Ji Tianqing to laugh even more contemptuously after hearing his words. "Ha ha ha. Great Emperor Chuyun, you really think too highly of yourself. You think too highly of yourself. No one can protect the person I want to kill. Even if Martial God Taihao comes tonight, you'll still die." As soon as he finished speaking, a golden light surged out of Ji Tianqing's body and spread in all directions. A golden light shield with a radius of 10,000 feet appeared and enveloped the entire palace. This way, no matter what happened in the palace, even if the world was turned upside down, the outside world wouldn't know. Great Emperor Chuyun saw that Ji Tianqing was about to attack and immediately shouted in shock and anger, "Ji Tianqing! You bastard, you're too arrogant. Even if Divine Master Taihao doesn't come personally, he's powerful and will know about this immediately. I advise you to stop, or Divine Master Taihao won't forgive you." The black-robed Grand Master also held the black brush and golden book tightly and stood in front of Great Emperor Chuyun. He said to Ji Tianqing, "Ji Tianqing. You were once the first God's disciple of Mount Gods and received Divine Master Taihao's favor and guidance. How can you do such a treacherous thing? Are you worthy of Divine Master Taihao's nurturing and guidance? Aren't you afraid that this matter will spread and you'll be reviled by the world? Ji Tianqing glanced at him and sneered, you're singing the same tune, using both kindness and authority. You're quite familiar with this game. Unfortunately, such petty tricks don't work on me. Great Emperor Chu Yun, I've already sent a message to Martial God Taihao and asked him to appoint the seventh divine son as the new emperor of Chu Yun. You can give up now. What? Great Emperor Chu Yun's eyes widened in shock and horror. He had never expected Ji Tianqing to come up with such a drastic plan. His greatest reliance was the Chu Yun Empire and his last life-saving charm was Martial God Taihao. However, Ji Tianqing had already prepared for this. Recommending the seventh divine son as the new holy emperor of Chu Yun was equivalent to cutting off his escape route. Bastard! You're so vicious. Great Emperor Chu Yun was so angry that he trembled and cursed. The black-robed Grand Master was also filled with anger. He roared in a hoarse voice, Ji Tianqing. Who do you think you are? Do you think you can influence the Divine Master's decision? Ji Tianqing glanced at the two of them with pity and said indifferently, you don't even know that you're about to die. How pitiful. All right, you don't have the chance to say your last words. It's time to go. After saying that, a black light flashed in his right hand and the sword of burial of heaven appeared. Heaven-splitting sword. Chapter 2171. Swoosh. The 10-foot-long golden sword instantly shattered the study room, causing debris to fly everywhere. The great Emperor Chu Yun's expression changed drastically. He quickly took out a crimson sword and slashed out sword radiance. The black-robed Grand Tutor stood in front of him. He held the golden book in his left hand and waved a huge black brush in his right hand, shooting out a seven-colored light beam. Boom! A deafening muffled sound burst out. The seven-colored light beam was instantly shattered. The black-robed Grand Tutor was also sent flying. He spat out blood and crashed into the wall. The golden sword's power did not decrease at all. It destroyed the great Emperor Chu Yun's sword radiance and sent him flying as well. Boom! Immediately after, the golden sword struck the study room's floor with a loud bang. The entire palace was shattered into pieces by the giant sword. It swayed and collapsed into ruins. The violent shockwave spread out and turned the ruins into dust, scattering them into the night sky. In the blink of an eye, the entire Heguanyuan palace was reduced to dust. All that was left was a huge crater. However, the area around the crater was sealed by a golden light barrier with a radius of over 10,000 feet. The aftermath of the battle would not spread out and would not affect the other palaces and residences. Cough cough, the great Emperor Chu Yun and the Grand Tutor flew out of the crater. Their faces were covered in blood as they coughed and were covered in dust. Both of them were in a sorry state. Their expressions were ferocious and vicious. Although they knew that Ji Tianqing's strength was terrifying and that he could fight against Wu Duantian, they still had some hope. However, they still had a trace of hope in their hearts. They thought that if they joined forces, they would be able to block Ji Tianqing's attack. But now, their fantasies and hopes had been shattered. The two of them simply could not believe that Ji Tianqing's strength was actually formidable to such an extent. With just one move, he had injured the two of them. They looked at each other and immediately communicated with their eyes to come up with a countermeasure. In the next moment, the black-robed Grand Tutor channeled all his power into the golden book. It released a huge shield to protect him and the great Emperor Chu Yun. At the same time, he waved the huge black brush with all his might, thrusting more than 30 black light blades at Ji Tianqing. Instead of attacking, great Emperor Chu Yun turned around and flew to the vicinity of the golden light shield. Holding his sword with both hands, he slashed down viciously. It turned out that he and the state preceptor had made up their minds to escape. They did not want to be entangled with Ji Tianqing. He attacked the golden light shield while the imperial advisor covered for him. The two of them cooperated very well. However, Ji Tianqing had come prepared, so how could he possibly allow them to escape? Boom! Great Emperor Chu Yun's sword struck the golden light shield, but it didn't break it. Instead, he was knocked back 10 steps. At this time, Ji Tianqing coldly shouted and waved his sword again, sending out a cold light. Piercing sword. The star-like cold light flashed in the night sky. In the next instant, before Great Emperor Chu Yun could react, the cold light exploded in his chest and abdomen. Boom! With a deafening explosion, Great Emperor Chu Yun's physical body collapsed on the spot, exploding into a rain of flesh and blood. The golden dragon robe he was wearing, as well as the sacred soft armor he was wearing, were also shattered by the explosion. Only a cluster of crimson god souls remained intact and flew out of the rain of blood. This scene shocked the state preceptor, and his soul almost left his body. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that the defensive spell he cast would be completely ineffective against Ji Tianqing. Even though he blocked in front of Great Emperor Chu Yun, the latter's physical body was still destroyed by the sword. "Goddamn bastard, I'll fight you to the death." After coming back to his senses, the state preceptor roared hysterically. He waved his black brush and pounced at Ji Tianqing. In an instant, more than 60 fiery spear blades shot out. Swish, 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 swish. The fiery spear blades enveloped Ji Tianqing's figure. However, he was fearless. Golden light surged out of his left hand, and he raised his palm to slap the fiery spear blades. Heavenly Dragon Palm. A gigantic golden dragon claw slammed into the fiery spear blade, instantly shattering it into smithereens. The dragon claw's power did not diminish at all. It slammed into the state preceptor again, sending him flying. Blood spurted out of his 7 orifices as he crashed into the deep pit. On the other side, Great Emperor Chu Yun's soul also entered the pit, trying to escape underground. A cold light flashed in Ji Tianqing's eyes. He waved his sword in his right hand. Soul Slayer. An illusory giant sword of black light instantly struck Great Emperor Chu Yun's divine soul. Crack! His soul shattered on the spot. It was cut into 8 pieces and scattered powerlessly in the deep pit. A martial sage expert, Great Emperor Chu Yun, had fallen just like that. The state preceptor lay in the deep pit covered in blood. After witnessing Great Emperor Chu Yun's death with his own eyes, he was in complete despair. The anger in his heart turned into fear, and the battle intent that soared to the heavens also vanished into thin air. He watched as Ji Tianqing swung his sword again and slashed down from the sky. He was instantly jolted awake and roared at the top of his lungs, "Ji Tianqing! Don't kill me! The person who murdered you was Great Emperor Chu Yun, not me. I was only following his instructions. I had no choice." The state preceptor roared with tears and snot flowing down his face. He pleaded with Ji Tianqing for mercy. "Please be magnanimous and spare my lowly life. As long as you don't kill me, I'm willing to do anything for you and pledge my life to you." Ji Tianqing came to the top of the deep pit and looked down at him from above. He said expressionlessly, "You're his accomplice. Naturally, you'll be punished as well. As for followers and guards, I don't need them. So, I'm sorry." As soon as he finished speaking, the burial of heaven sword shone with a cold light and slashed down. Boom! With a loud sound, the state preceptor's physical body and soul shattered at the same time, turning into a dark red rain of blood that sprinkled into the deep pit. The burial of heaven sword emitted a black light and swallowed the state preceptor and Great Emperor Chu Yun's soul fragments. The night sky returned to calm. Ji Tianqing put away the burial of heaven sword and disappeared into the night sky. He left quietly. The light shield that appeared out of nowhere naturally attracted the attention of many guards and cultivators. Dozens of guards and experts surrounded the light shield. They stuck their heads out and looked inside, secretly guessing what had happened. Unfortunately, their eyes and divine senses could not penetrate the light shield and see the situation inside. After a full 2 hours, the golden light shield naturally dissipated. Only then did everyone see the situation clearly. The originally resplendent Higuanyuan palace had disappeared, leaving behind only ruins and a huge crater. Even the people in Higuanyuan palace had disappeared without a trace. Such a strange scene made everyone's hearts jump, but they were also full of doubts. Not long after, this matter spread on the mountain peak. However, this matter only caused a small disturbance and did not cause any big waves. Countless cultivators' attention was focused on that big shot in Wangtian City. Of course, there was also the upcoming Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. Higuanyuan Palace was just a palace. The person who lived in it was not a famous big shot. Chapter 2172. The night passed by quickly. The next morning. At dawn, Wangtian City was bustling with noise and excitement. Countless martial artists emerged from all over sky-gazing city, rushing to the square in the middle of the city. Today was the day of the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly. The location of the Sacred Assembly was the heaven viewing platform in the square. According to past practice, today was the first day of the Sacred Assembly. The warriors participating in the Sacred Assembly would not fight. They would gather on the heaven viewing platform to discuss the profound meaning and experience of the martial way. Other than the young martial sages, many older martial sages would also participate in the Sacred Assembly to discuss and communicate with the younger generation. Warriors from all over the world did not want to miss this opportunity. Everyone wanted to listen to the martial sages exchange their experiences, hoping to get some inspiration and advice. The square in the city was very wide, taking up an area of 10 miles. It could accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. There were also pavilions and gardens built on the square. The environment was quite elegant. As early as a few days ago, this place had been cleaned up and decorated very grandly. Countless warriors rushed into the square like a tide and took up positions close to the heaven viewing platform. The closer they were to the heaven viewing platform, the more chances they had to see the martial sages and listen to their discussions and exchanges. As for the warriors who came late, they could only stand further away from the heaven viewing platform. After 2 hours, the sun had just risen to the sky and the square was already crowded with people. At least 300,000 warriors gathered in the square, discussing in groups of 3 to 5. Their faces were full of excitement and anticipation. In the center of the square, there was a white platform that was 100 feet high. This platform was made of supreme spiritual jade mixed with more than 10 kinds of special stones. It was very tough and could store the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. It could absorb the spiritual power of the warriors and change into various formations. The platform was wide, at least 1,000 feet high. There were rows of golden flags on the edge, embroidered with the patterns of the sun, moon, and stars. Over 100 elite guards stood around the high platform like stone statues. They were all wearing standard silver armor, holding halberds and wearing red tasseled helmets. They looked cold and indifferent, exuding a dignified and austere aura. At this moment, a noble and dazzling golden light flew out from the governor's mansion and went straight to the square in the city. The square, which was already bustling with noise, immediately burst into cheers. "Look, everyone! His Highness the eldest divine child is here. It's the First Highness, the commander of the immortal army, and the city lord. The grand divine son is here. The sacred assembly is about to begin." As the cheers spread, many cultivators stopped talking and looked up at the sky. Under the gazes of tens of thousands of people, the golden light flew over the square and landed on the heaven viewing platform. Shwa! After the golden light dissipated, 3 figures appeared. The leader was the great divine son, Yuan Zhen. Today, he wore an exquisite and luxurious dark golden dragon robe, with the sun, moon, and stars embroidered on the collar and sleeves. He wore a double dragon nebula crown on his head, showing off his unparalleled nobility. The two men standing behind him were Qin Zheng, the commander of the Immortal Guards, and the Lord of Sky City. The two of them stood there with a solemn expression. Their postures were respectful, as if they were followers and guards. In this way, Yuan Zhen's status was even more noble and he was in high spirits. He also became the center of attention, receiving the reverence and worship of hundreds of thousands of martial artists. When the cheers in the square died down, Yuan Zhen waved his hand, indicating for the crowd to quiet down. With a smile on his face, he announced in a loud voice, "Fellow cultivators, the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly, which is held once every 50 years, will be held today. I, Yuan Zhen, represent the Heaven Extinction Divine Nation to welcome everyone. In this year's Divine Martial Sacred Assembly, the number of young martial saints who are qualified to participate in the Sacred Assembly has reached 28. In addition, I have also invited 6 martial arts masters to come to this Sacred Assembly to discuss their martial arts experiences with everyone. Now, let's welcome the 6 senior martial saints to the stage." Hearing Yuan Zhen's words, the martial artists in the square all looked expectant. Among the crowd below the heaven viewing platform, a few rays of light immediately lit up and flew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, the 6 rays of light landed on the heaven viewing platform. After the light faded, 6 figures with different appearances appeared. Among the 6 veteran martial saints, there were 5 men and 1 woman. Most of them were white-haired elders. The youngest among them had a head of white hair and looked to be about 50 years old. The 6 experts stood in a row on the heaven viewing platform and saluted Yuan Zhen with their hands folded. "Greetings, Your Highness." Yuan Zhen nodded with a smile and excused himself. Then, he introduced the 6 veteran martial saints to the crowd. He pointed to the first martial saint on the left and introduced him in a loud voice. "This is the Mountain Exploration Martial Saint, a highly respected expert. He is the famous temple master of the Heaven Viewing Temple." More than 1,000 years ago, not long after I was born, the Mountain Exploration Martial Saint was already a famous martial saint expert. 800 years ago, the Mountain Exploration Martial Saint went into seclusion in the mountains and no longer cared about the affairs of the mortal world. He focused on educating people. Now, the beloved disciple of the Mountain Exploration Martial Saint, Lady Chaoying, has also become a martial saint expert. It can be said that there are 2 martial saints in one sect. Many of you have watched the sacred assemblies several times, so you must be familiar with the Mountain Exploration Martial Saint. As his voice fell, the white-haired, gray-robed Mountain Exploration Martial Saint saluted the hundreds of thousands of martial artists below the platform with his hands folded. Immediately, the crowd burst into enthusiastic cheers. Many martial artists bowed to him in return. In the hearts of many martial artists, the identity, experience, and character of the Exploration Mountain Martial Saint was indeed worthy of being called a person of virtue and prestige. Then, Yuan Zhen walked to the second martial saint. This martial saint was a white-haired man. He wore a long, sapphire blue robe and held a folding fan in his hand. A green wine gourd hung at his waist. He was tall and handsome, but his eyes were a little lonely. His whole body exuded an aura of vicissitudes and melancholy, which made him look quite mysterious. Yuan Zhen introduced him to the crowd. "I think everyone is unfamiliar with this senior martial saint, because this is his first time participating in the sacred assembly. However, this senior's identity and strength are not weaker than any of the leading figures. He calls himself the Wine Sage. He has the bloodline of the Wenren clan, an ancient hidden sex aristocratic family. He is a saint with 10 natural meridians. For more than 1,000 years, Senior Wenren has roamed the 4 seas leisurely. He has seen the world's scenery and explored countless forbidden lands and historical remains. Senior Wenren's vast knowledge and experience has greatly impressed me. It has been an eye-opener. I also believe that Senior Wenren will definitely bring new insights and experience to everyone by participating in this sacred assembly. Originally, many martial artists in the square were puzzled by this handsome, melancholy, and mysterious senior. After listening to Yuan Zhen's introduction, the crowd realized that this person was actually a descendant of an ancient aristocratic family. He had even traveled the world leisurely. The world was big and full of strange things. However, 99% of martial artists would never have the chance to travel the world in their lifetime. Chapter 2173. After introducing martial sage Xian Shan and Wenren Jiushen, Yuan Zhen introduced the other four seniors. The four of them had participated in the sage meetings a few times and many martial artists recognized them. For example, see Lord Fu of the Thousand Whale Island in the South Sea, Granny Yulong of the Crouching Dragon Mountain in the West Blue, Palace Master Di Shinshao of the Cloud Sky Palace. Among the 6 veteran martial saints, the Exploration Mountain Martial Saint was the most senior, had the most respected status, and was also the most respected. Wenren Jiushen's background was the most mysterious and the most unfamiliar. The other senior martial sages were also powerful and had a close relationship with the Heaven End God Nation. After Yuan Zhen introduced them, he announced loudly, "Next, let's welcome the 28 young martial sages to the platform." As his voice fell, figures flew out from the crowd and the pavilions around the square and landed on the heaven-gazing platform one after another. These people were young martial sages from all over the continent and their strengths were between the rank 1 to 6 martial sages. Regardless of whether they were men or women, every one of them had a graceful bearing and extraordinary bearing. Every time a martial sage landed on the heaven viewing platform, Yuan Zhen would introduce them to the crowd. This is martial sage Qin Shan, the youngest sage emperor of the Heaven End God Nation. This is martial sage Qinyu, the palace master of the Southern Ridge Chiyue Palace and a famous beauty. This is Lady Chao Ying, the beloved disciple of martial sage Xian Shan, a rare martial arts talent. This red-haired, golden-eyed young martial sage is the king of the Yen tribe, martial sage Atal. As Yuan Zhen's voice rang out, the number of people on the heaven viewing platform increased rapidly. In just a few minutes, 24 martial sages had ascended the heaven viewing platform and stood around Yuan Zhen. Even Taihao Yunqi and Jiu had ascended the heaven viewing platform. Only Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were left. They stood in the pavilion at the corner of the square and waited anxiously. What's going on? Why isn't young Master Ji Tianqing here yet? Lu Baishuang looked around and searched for Ji Tianqing. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were also anxious and worried as they discussed. Could it be that young Master Ji is delayed by something? Could it be that he's cultivating in seclusion and forgot that the sacred assembly is starting today? Why don't we hurry over to the Eastern Arrival Inn and find him? As the two of them discussed, they turned to leave. Lu Baishuang frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he thought of something and quickly said, "Don't go." Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian stopped and looked at her in confusion. What happened? If we don't look for him and he misses the time, wouldn't that be? Lu Baishuang shook his head and said calmly, everyone knows that the Shenwu Sacred Assembly will be held for 3 days. On the first day, there will be no battles, only discussions. The so-called exchange of Dao might not be very beneficial to us. The main reason was to show his face in front of everyone and raise his reputation and prestige. According to my understanding of young Master Ji, he has always been indifferent to fame and fortune. He disdains to show off his prestige in front of others. Moreover, the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly did not stipulate that young martial saints had to participate in the Dao discussion. I don't think young Master Ji will come today. He will only appear tomorrow when everyone enters the void platform to fight. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian looked at each other and fell silent. Both of them knew that Lu Baishuang and Ji Tianqing had an inexplicable relationship. Since Lu Baishuang was so sure, it was most likely true. The two of them fell silent for a moment and couldn't help but sigh, since Holy Emperor Bai Shuang is so sure, it must be true. I didn't expect young Master Ji's character to be so noble. He is indeed different from ordinary people. Yes. So many young martial saints want to seize this opportunity to show off in front of everyone and raise their reputation. Only young Master Ji doesn't care about fame. In terms of state of mind and level, he is 10 times better than these martial saints. Zhuo Mingqi frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, he thought of something and couldn't help but ask, "That's not right. If young Master Ji isn't here to raise his reputation, why is he here?" Previously, when we advised him to leave, he said that he has a reason to stay. Mu Changtian also realized that something was wrong and looked at Lu Baishuang in confusion. Lu Baishuang frowned and pondered for a moment before saying, "If I'm not wrong, he must have come to participate in the sacred assembly for the competition on the void stage. Either he is here for the void stage, or he is here for the rewards of the sacred assembly." Rewards? Mu Changtian frowned again, still confused. "It's just some cultivation resources and holy weapons. Young Master Ji shouldn't care about them, right?" Lu Baishuang shook her head and explained, "Those are just ordinary rewards. Of course he doesn't care about them. I heard that the reward for the first place of this sacred assembly is incomparably generous. It is said that other than the cultivation resources and holy weapons, there is also a mysterious pearl. That pearl seems to be something that martial god Tian Ju found by chance in the astral wind fire layer when he was in the astral wind fire layer." Zhuo Mingqi suddenly understood and nodded, "So that's it. The astral wind fire layer is extremely dangerous. Even if a martial saint enters it, his life will be in danger. That mysterious jewel must be a rare and precious treasure. Only a treasure of this level can tempt young Master Ji." Mu Changtian nodded slightly and said with a smile, "According to the usual practice, Yuan Zhen will announce the rewards after the Tao discussion. We will know the result then." After the three of them finished their discussion, they stopped worrying about Ji Tianqing and flew up to the sky and landed on the heaven viewing platform. Yuan Zhen glanced at the three of them and introduced expressionlessly, "These three young martial saints are Martial Emperor Bai Shuang, Martial Saint Ming Qi, and Martial Saint Chang Tian from the Luoshui Divine Country." When the three of them stood on the heaven viewing platform, he looked around and frowned. There are 28 participants in this sacred assembly. Why are there only 27 people here? Yuan Zhen asked subconsciously. His voice wasn't too loud. The martial artists in the square could not hear it clearly, but the martial saints on the heaven viewing platform heard it clearly. Everyone was shocked. They looked around and whispered to each other. No one dared to believe that someone had signed up but did not show up on the platform. Was this not to embarrass the first divine son? Who was this person? Did he not know the immensity of heaven and earth? A cold light flashed in Qin Zheng's eyes. He said in a deep voice, "First Highness, the 27 young martial saints are all here. Only Ji Tianqing is absent. This person has always been arrogant and domineering. Everyone knows that he does not put the martial artists in his eyes. He is not here today because he disdains to be with the martial saints." Qin Zheng's voice was deep and powerful. It spread throughout the square and was heard by the hundreds of thousands of martial artists. Chapter 2174. If Qin Zheng had not said that, the crowd would not have guessed who was absent from the sacred assembly. Even if they had guessed that Ji Tianqing was absent, they would have thought that he was trying to embarrass the Grand Divine Son. However, Qin Zheng's words made it seem as though Ji Tianqing was looking down on the martial sages on the stage and did not want to show up. However, Ji Tianqing was arrogant and domineering. This was something that the entire mainland knew. No one could refute Qin Zheng's words. The expressions of the 30 martial sages turned unnatural as they felt awkward and indignant. The young martial sage Qing Shan muttered with a strange expression, even if he is talented and powerful, he should not be so rude. This is the martial arts sacred assembly of the entire mainland. With so many martial sages and seniors present, how can he be so arrogant? Martial sage Chao Ying, who was dressed in green and wore a Taoist crown, said with a complicated tone, after all, his identity is special. He is the reincarnation of the Grand Divine Son. It is reasonable for him to be arrogant. Another young man in a golden robe was martial god Tianju's fourth son, Yuan Chong. On the night of the battle between Ji Tianxing and Wu Duantian, he had been present and watched it. He was also hostile towards Ji Tianxing. He sneered and said in a mocking tone, "So what if he is the reincarnation of Kenshin? Does he really think that he is Kenshin? He had just broken through to the martial sage realm not long ago and he was already so arrogant and condescending. When he reaches the half-step to divine realm, won't he bring chaos to the world and look down on the three great divine masters?" Not only were the young martial sages talking about it, but even a few of the older martial sages were unhappy. Island Master Fu, who was wearing a blue robe, stroked his white beard that was more than a foot long. He shook his head and said, "No matter how talented he is, he can't be so arrogant. It will affect his reputation and ruin his luck. Why doesn't he care about it?" Granny Yulong and Yunshao Palace Master also complained about it. They felt that Ji Tianxing was too arrogant and it was not a good thing. Only Wenren Jiusheng was waving his folding fan lightly as if the matter had nothing to do with him, and he seemed to be lost in thought and didn't say anything. The white-haired martial Saint Xian Shan coughed softly and said in a deep voice, "Let's not discuss this anymore. I believe that he must have his reasons for not coming. After all, his identity was special. What happened the night before had already caused a huge commotion. Today, there were hundreds of thousands of cultivators present. It was reasonable that he didn't want to show his face in order to avoid causing more trouble. It's fine if he doesn't come. We don't have one or two more people, nor do we lack one or two people." After saying that, he cupped his hands towards Yuan Zhen and said, "Your Highness need not take this matter to heart. The sacred assembly can proceed as usual." Yuan Zhen nodded to show that he understood. As expected, he didn't mention it again. However, both his and Qin Zheng's eyes flashed with a sneer of success. And in the square below the heaven-gazing platform, hundreds of thousands of martial artists were discussing animatedly, erupting with sound waves like a mountain torrent. As expected, a martial saint is missing. I heard from Lord Qin that it's Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing? This name is so familiar. Isn't he the god of slaughter in white who led the Luoshui divine kingdom to defeat the demon army? It should be him. I heard that he personally killed 2 to 3 million demons on the battlefield. He deserves to be called the god of slaughter. Not only that, I also heard that he killed 2 demon saints and single-handedly slaughtered hundreds of thousands of demon army. Oh my God! How can there be such a brave and ferocious person in this world? Does he have 3 heads and 6 arms and a ferocious face? I heard that this person is the number 1 god's disciple of the Luoshui divine kingdom and is also known as the number 1 genius of our race. I wonder if it's true or not. No one knows if he's the number 1 genius or not. But one thing is for sure. He's definitely the most arrogant and domineering person. He's not afraid of anything. I heard that he had a conflict with the Grand Divine Prince the night before. I guess he deliberately didn't come today to embarrass the Grand Divine Prince. He even dares to offend the Grand Divine Prince. He's really arrogant. Similar discussions rang out among the crowd in the square. Almost 95% of the martial artists had heard of Ji Tianxing's legendary deeds. However, ordinary martial artists did not know Ji Tianxing, let alone understand him. They were influenced by Qin Zheng and could only hear rumors. Their impression of Ji Tianxing was very bad. Lu Baishuang, Shuamingqi, Mu Changtian, Jiu, Taihao Yunqi and the rest could only look on. They were secretly angry but could not do anything. After all, this was the sky-gazing city, the territory of the heaven and divine kingdom. Qin Zheng, Yuan Zhen and the rest controlled their mouths. It was up to them to criticize whoever they wanted. Fortunately, Marshal Saint Xian Shan had said something fair, so Yuan Zhen would not be too harsh. After waiting for the martial artists in the square to discuss for a while, Yuan Zhen announced loudly, "Everyone, I now announce that this year's Divine Martial Sacred Assembly officially begins. Today is the first day of the Sacred Assembly. More than 30 martial saints have gathered on the sky-gazing platform and will discuss Tao in public. Everyone can express their opinions. All the doubts and guesses about martial cultivation can be voiced out. Everyone can discuss and exchange ideas together. As for the martial artists in the square, it is best to keep quiet and not make a ruckus. If you can learn a move or half a move during the martial saints' discussion, or comprehend some true meaning, then it will be your fortune." As his voice fell, the hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the square indeed shut their mouths. Everyone held their breaths and focused, looking up at the martial saints on the high platform, as if they were listening attentively. On the sky-gazing platform, more than 30 martial saints looked at each other but remained silent. No one stood out to speak first. Yuan Zhen had long been used to this kind of situation. He smiled and said, "Since all the martial saints are so humble, then I will throw a brick to attract jade. In the past few years, I have been studying an ancient book called the 5 Elements Strange Records. Even though this was just a book of unofficial history, it was still a book. The stories recorded in it are mostly some unorthodox and unimaginable strange things in the wild, as well as all kinds of anecdotes. However, I am very interested in one of the stories and have studied it for many years. It is said that in the ancient times, there was a youth from the Spirit Wolf clan who was born with unparalleled talent. In just over 20 years, he cultivated to the martial saint realm and became the first demon in history. Not long after that person broke through to the martial saint realm, he killed the emperor of the Spirit Wolf clan and became the emperor himself. Originally, he had been engrossed in cultivation and was only in his 20s. However, he was very familiar with the history of the Spirit Wolf clan. He even knew many secrets that the older generation did not know. After many years, people found out that this person was the emperor of the Spirit Wolf clan from 800 years ago. He had cultivated to the god realm, but he had encountered a strong enemy in the void and died unexpectedly. However, for some unknown reason, after he had died 800 years ago, he had miraculously been reborn. Chapter 2175. In the beginning, when Yuan Zhen was telling the story, many people listened attentively. Not only the hundreds of thousands of warriors, but even the martial saints on the platform also felt that it was strange. But in the end, everyone understood. It turned out that Yuan Zhen had brought up this topic to let everyone discuss the reincarnation and rebirth. Anyone with a bit of intelligence would immediately understand that there was an ulterior motive behind his words and that he was referring to something else. Then, when they thought about the rebirth of Kenshin as Ji Tianqing a few days ago, many people's expressions became complicated. The hundreds of thousands of warriors on the square looked at each other and whispered to each other. Even if there were a few people who had not heard the news, they would know after hearing the others' discussion. In this way, the news of Kenshin's rebirth as Ji Tianqing spread again and became something that everyone knew. On the heaven viewing platform, many martial saints frowned and pondered, thinking about how to answer. Taihao Yunqi, Jiu Jiu, Lu Baishuang and the others all frowned, their faces gloomy. Jiu Jiu stared coldly at Yuan Zhen and secretly said to Taihao Yunqi through sound transmission, "Brother Yunqi, this Yuan Zhen is too despicable. He is despicable and shameless to the extreme. As the son of the Divine Master, how can he be so despicable? I think he must have made up the story casually. He is insinuating and purposely spreading the news." Taihao Yunqi nodded slightly and said, "I already knew that Yuan Zhen was a hypocrite, but I didn't expect him to be so despicable." He did this because he wanted the news to spread to the whole world and bring endless danger and trouble to Ji Tianqing. On the other side, Lu Baishuang, Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian were also indignantly discussing with each other through sound transmission. Damn Yuan Zhen, he is really shameless, bastard. Lu Baishuang was so angry that he gritted his teeth, wishing he could cut Yuan Zhen into pieces. Zhuo Mingqi nodded in agreement and said with a sigh, the great divine son of the heaven and divine nation, the future divine master, is so despicable. It is really unexpected. I don't know how young Master Ji offended him to make him hate him so much that he would resort to such despicable means. Mu Changtian sighed helplessly. No wonder young Master Ji didn't show up today. It seems like he already knew that Yuan Zhen would embarrass him. It's also good that young Master Ji isn't here. Otherwise, this matter will become even more difficult to resolve. At this moment, Marshal Saint Qing Shan was the first to speak after pondering for a moment. Eldest divine child, what you said about reincarnation only existed in myths and legends. It's not credible. As the ancient saying goes, death is like the extinguishing of a lamp. Everything comes to an end. However, some things have happened recently that have overturned the views of this emperor and countless people. Like countless others, this emperor's understanding has been refreshed, and I have no choice but to accept the seemingly absurd concept of reincarnation. Yuan Zhen nodded with a smile and said, that's right. Someone has already proven that reincarnation does exist. This is extremely attractive to experts like us. Think about it, if we die one day, but we can still be reincarnated. We can make up for our regrets and take revenge on our enemies. How exciting would that be? Marshal Saint Qing Shan, it seems like you have some opinions on this matter. Why don't you say it directly? With Yuan Zhen's encouragement, Marshal Saint Qing Shan no longer had any scruples. He said loudly, this emperor thinks that only those who have reached the God realm can reincarnate. Martial saints like us, although we are already standing at the peak of the continent, we still haven't transcended the limits of mortals. Only those who have reached the God realm and grasped the power of heaven and earth can reincarnate. The covered island master shook his head and said in a serious tone, in my opinion, even a martial god expert would not be able to reincarnate. After all, the dead can't be resurrected. Life and death are all reincarnated. This is the law of heaven. I think only by leaving this world and ascending to the more mysterious upper realm can one escape the cycle of life and death and have the chance to be reborn. The covered island master's words caused many martial saints to nod in agreement. Everyone was filled with curiosity and anticipation towards the mysterious upper realm. No one knew what kind of world the legendary upper realm was. Was it really not under the control of heaven? Granny Yulong sighed with regret and said in a low voice, although the covered island master's words are very reasonable. Since ancient times, only Kenshin has successfully ascended and left this world. Even people as strong as the three divine masters were trapped in this world. So, even if we have guessed the secret of reincarnation, it is useless. If we can't ascend to the upper realm, everything is nonsense. The cloudy sky palace master frowned and thought for a while. He said solemnly, since ancient times, Kenshin is the only one who has ascended. He is the only one who knows the secret of ascension. When Kenshin fell, the entire continent was shocked and mourned. Everyone thought that the path to ascension was cut off and no one knew the secret of ascension. But with the blessing of heaven, that person came back. In the previous life, everyone missed the opportunity. In this life, there is a chance to make up for it. No matter what everyone thinks, this emperor doesn't want to miss it again. Hearing his words, the eyes of the martial saints present lit up, and a strange look flashed across their eyes. As long as one was not a fool, they would understand what he meant. Kenshin was too powerful then. Even though everyone knew that he knew the secret of ascension, no one dared to offend him. But now, it was different. Kenshin was reborn as a human youth and had just broken through to the martial saint realm. If they took action now, the martial saints would have a chance to successfully obtain the secret of ascension. Moreover, this matter should not be delayed. If they delayed for a few more years, with Kenshin's talent, he would be even more powerful. By then, the martial saints would not be able to do anything to him. Thinking of this, many martial saints secretly clenched their fists and made their own plans. Yuanzhen saw everyone's reaction and could not help but reveal a satisfied smile. He looked at the cloudy sky palace master with admiration. Obviously, this was the result he wanted. Next, Martial Saint Xian Shan took the initiative to speak and changed the topic. Everyone stopped talking about reincarnation and ascension and started to discuss the cultivation of a few cultivation techniques. The martial saints expressed their own opinions. Just like the previous sacred assemblies, they conversed peacefully and harmoniously. However, Taihao Yinqi, Jiu, Lu Baishuang, and the others felt indignant. Everyone remained silent and had no interest in participating in the discussion. Unknowingly, 10 hours had passed. It was evening, and the sun was about to set. The afterglow of the setting sun shrouded the heaven viewing platform. The day of the martial saints' discussion was also coming to an end. Yuanzhen opened his mouth and announced, "Everyone, this sacred assembly's discussion has come to an end. I believe that after the discussion and exchange, everyone will have gained a lot. Tomorrow morning, we'll gather here again, and we'll have a sparring match. However, according to the previous sacred assemblies, I will first announce the contents of the rewards for the top 5. The rewards for this sacred assembly are exceptionally generous. There is also a mysterious gift." Chapter 2176. When the martial sages were discussing, many of the martial sages on the stage were not interested. But the ordinary martial artists below the stage were listening with great interest and were very serious. Now that Yuanzhen was going to announce the rewards for the top 5 in the sacred assembly, the situation was completely different. The ordinary martial artists were not interested. After all, it had nothing to do with them. However, the martial sages on the stage were immediately energized and looked at Yuanzhen with shining eyes. Yuanzhen looked around and said with a smile, "Tomorrow's Void Platform Martial Arts Symposium will be the same as before. The top 5 winners will receive generous rewards. The 5th place will receive a lower-grade sacred weapon and 100 million spiritual stones or cultivation resources of the same value. The 4th place will receive a lower-grade sacred weapon, 100 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources and a lower-grade sacred secret skill. The 3rd place will receive a middle-grade sacred weapon and 200 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources. The 2nd place will receive a middle-grade sacred weapon, 200 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources and a middle-grade sacred secret skill. As for the 1st place, the reward will be 300 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources and a mysterious gift." After hearing the contents of the rewards, the martial sages were surprised and started to discuss. Wow! The rewards of this sacred assembly are indeed more generous than those of the previous ones. The 5th place will receive a sacred weapon and 100 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources. In the previous years, there were only 100 million spiritual stones of cultivation resources. I guess that in the past few decades, the holy nation's weapon craftsmen have made a large number of new products. Only the holy nation, the strongest nation, has such strong financial resources to take out such a huge amount of cultivation resources and sacred weapons as the rewards of the sacred assembly. If you can enter the top 5, not only will you be honored and famous, but you will also receive such amazing rewards. It's too tempting. All the martial sages were looking forward to it. Martial Saint Qing Shan frowned and thought for a while. He looked at the eldest divine son with shining eyes and asked, "Eldest divine son, what is the mysterious gift for the 1st place?" Hearing his words, the young martial sages around him all smiled and started discussing. Marshal Saint Ching Shan is already in the top 5. It seems that he is aiming for the first place this time. Yes. Marshal Saint Ching Shan is so concerned about the mysterious gift. It seems that he is determined to get the first place. Although he's ambitious, it's really too difficult for him to get first place. The fourth divine son, Yuan Chong, has always been in first place for several consecutive sacred assemblies. The fourth divine prince, Yuan Chong, is only second to the eldest divine prince in terms of talent and strength. Marshal Saint Ching Shan is still lacking compared to him. Since it's a mysterious gift, of course I can't say it out loud. Otherwise, how can it still be called a mysterious gift? Yuan Zhen raised his hand, indicating for everyone to quiet down. He looked at the martial saint of Green Mountain with a smile, and said calmly, "The martial arts competition will begin tomorrow, and that mysterious gift will be announced to the world." Since that was the case, there was no harm in saying it now. This seat will tell you the truth. That mysterious gift was a pearl that Father God accidentally obtained in the heavenly wind fire layer when he was on a mental journey. That precious pearl seemed to be made by nature, as if it was a divine object nurtured in the layer of wind and fire, or a crystallization of the wind and fire, with infinite power. Father God was already an omnipotent divine being, so he didn't have much use for it, so he wanted to give it to this seat. But this seat felt ashamed to accept it, so I suggested to take it out as the prize of this sacred assembly. Only then would it be meaningful. After hearing Yuan Zhen's words, the martial saints showed respect in their eyes, and whispered to each other. "I see. The heavenly wind fire layer is the most dangerous, and only divine beings can travel in it. That precious pearl was born in the heavenly wind fire layer, so it must be a rare divine object. I wonder what kind of miraculous use that pearl has. No wonder it's called a mysterious gift. The eldest divine prince is really noble. The heavenly divine prince wants to give that precious pearl to him, but he took it out as the prize of the sacred assembly. The eldest divine prince's broad mind and magnanimity are really admirable. With the eldest divine prince's talent and demeanor, once he reaches the divine realm, he will definitely inherit the divine master's position. By then, the heavenly divine nation will be even more glorious." Marshal Saint Ching Shan, Chao Ying, and the others praised the eldest divine prince. But Taihao Yinqi, Jiu, Lu Baishuang, and the others were indifferent, and secretly curled their lips. Jiu showed a disdainful expression, and said to Taihao Yinqi, "This Yuan Zhen is really hypocritical to the extreme, it's disgusting." The fourth divine prince, Yuan Chong, has been in first place for many years, this is a well-known fact. Yuan Zhen took out the precious pearl as a prize, saying it's a prize for the sacred assembly, but it's actually a gift to Yuan Chong. "Yes, that's true." Taihao Yinqi nodded slightly, and said expressionlessly, "This is killing two birds with one stone, he can gain a good reputation, and he won't really give the precious pearl away. However, I do hope that a miracle will happen in this sacred assembly, and destroy Yuan Zhen's plan." Jiu looked at him in confusion, and asked, "Seventh brother, what miracle?" Taihao Yinqi looked in the direction of the east arrival in, and only showed a playful smile, but did not explain. Not long after, the sun set. Yuan Zhen left the Skyview platform with Qin Zheng and the Skyview city master. More than 30 martial saints also left one after another. The hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the square were still gathered together, discussing endlessly. Only a small number of people left, and most of them stayed in the square, waiting for tomorrow's martial arts contest. Under the night sky, the Skyview city was brightly lit. On the 5th floor of the East Arrival Inn, Ji Tianqing's room was pitch black. He was sitting cross-legged in the secret chamber, cultivating with his eyes closed, and his whole body was surrounded by a bright golden light. Just as Lu Baishuang had guessed, he had never thought of participating in the martial saint debate. It was because he disdained it, and also because he did not want to waste time and trouble himself. However, the most important thing was that he needed to cultivate a secret technique that was of utmost importance. For the whole day, he had been cultivating in the secret chamber, and did not leave even half a step. No matter what happened outside, or what happened on the Skyview platform, it had nothing to do with him. Soon, the night passed. He did not stop cultivating until the sun rose the next day, and slowly stopped. The bright golden light around his body gradually retracted into his body. When he opened his eyes, a bright light flashed in his eyes, and his whole body emitted a sharp and terrifying aura. If one looked closely, they would discover that his body had undergone a subtle change. Every strand of hair and every pore seemed to be shining with starlight. The voice of the burial of heaven sounded in his mind, and asked doubtfully, "The Divine Martial Sacred Assembly has already started. It's fine if you don't participate in the debate, but why are you in a hurry to cultivate the absolute saint sword body now?" Ji Tianxing said calmly, "Of course there is a corresponding reason. I must make sufficient preparations." Chapter 2177. You mean, there will be danger in the void platform? Burial of Heaven immediately understood Ji Tianxing's meaning. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said calmly, "The void platform was set up by the Tianju divine nation. It seems to be a space opened up by martial god Tianju in the void. Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng's attitude towards me is obviously hostile and murderous. I have to be on guard against what they will do to the void platform. Even if they don't dare to kill me in front of everyone, it won't be a problem for them to make me wander in the void." Burial of Heaven said in a low voice, "Even martial saints can't stay in the void for too long. Once they encounter a void storm, tide or black hole, they will die without a doubt. Although you have cultivated the Armillary Heaven secret technique and are invincible in the world, you can't use it in the void. Therefore, only by cultivating the holy sword body can you cross the void. Even if you encounter a void crack or a void storm, you will have a chance to escape." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "That's right. Only then can I be prepared. Although the holy sword body I cultivated in the past was powerful and domineering, it wasn't magical enough. This time, I improved it and merged it with the astral body refinement art. I used the power of the stars to refine the holy sword body. Even if I wander in the void and can't return for hundreds of years, I can still absorb the power of the stars and my magic power will never dry up." Burial of Heaven was silent for a long time before he said with satisfaction, "Everyone knows that you are the reincarnation of Kenshin, but they don't know that you have already surpassed the Kenshin of the past. Now, after being reborn, you have completed an even more heaven-defying transformation." Ji Tianxing smiled and said with a complicated tone, "No matter who it is, if they have the chance to live again, they will live more brilliantly. Alright, time is almost up. We have to go to the heaven viewing platform. I didn't show up yesterday. I don't know how that bastard Yuan Zhen will frame me." Burial of Heaven said in a playful tone, "The strong are not afraid of rumors. Why do you have to take it to heart? When you take the first place on the void platform and defeat all the martial saints, all the criticisms will fall apart." Ji Tianxing nodded and said no more. He got up and left the secret chamber. As the sun rose, hundreds of thousands of martial artists gathered in the city square. Most of them had been here since yesterday and had never left. Seeing the martial sages rushing to the square from all directions, the cultivators cheered excitedly and discussed loudly. Not long after, more than 30 martial sacred realm experts arrived at the heaven-gazing platform. Except for Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the Sky City Lord who were not present, the 27 young martial saints and the 6 martial arts masters were all present. Everyone stood on the heaven-gazing platform and had nothing to do, so someone took the initiative to start a conversation. The martial saint of Green Mountain looked around, and the corners of his mouth curled up in a mocking smile. "It's strange. Why is it still the same as yesterday? Today was a sparring match. Why wasn't that guy here yet? Could it be that he won't show up again today? The fourth god's son, Yuan Chong, raised his eyebrows and said with a cold smile, if that guy isn't here when the sparring match starts, it means that he has automatically forfeited. Humph. There are actually people who believe that he doesn't want to be with us. In my opinion, he is simply timid and doesn't dare to show up. The martial saint frowned and said in a deep voice, in the past few days, his matter has become a hot topic in the city. Everyone knows about it. Even if he gives up on participating in the sparring match, it is a wise move to protect himself. It is understandable. The martial saint of Green Mountain said fair words without any malice. However, when the young martial saints heard it, they agreed that Ji Tianqing did not dare to show up. Chao Ying, Chen Yu, and the young martial saints of the Heaven and Divine Nation all smiled and whispered to each other. Seeing that everyone was criticizing Ji Tianqing, Lu Baishuang frowned and said in a deep voice with a frosty face, the sparring match hasn't started yet. There are still 45 minutes. Why are you all so anxious? I firmly believe that with young Master Ji's strength and temperament, he will definitely not give up. Her tone was resolute and decisive, and she said it with certainty. Many young martial sages stopped their discussion and looked at her strangely. The martial saint of Green Mountain smiled and asked in a playful tone, may I ask this young lady, what is your relationship with young Master Ji? How can you be so sure? Chao Ying looked at Lu Baishuang and said in a strange tone, although this holy emperor Baishuang is from the Luoshui divine nation like Ji Tianqing, she is especially concerned about Ji Tianqing. That night, when Ji Tianqing and Union Master Wu were fighting, I saw some clues. The other martial saint, Chen Yu, was wearing a pink dress. She was dressed brightly and was especially enchanting. She looked at Lu Baishuang with a smile and said in a sweet voice, as everyone knows, young Master Ji's origin is extraordinary. He is the reincarnation of a legendary figure. This holy emperor Baishuang has a unique insight and naturally recognizes young Master Ji. If she can become his partner, when young Master Ji returns to the peak in the future, holy emperor Baishuang will also be honored. With such thoughts and intentions, she will of course do her best to protect young Master Ji. I know this woman's thoughts the best. Although Martial Saint Chen Yu's words were elegant, the meaning in her words was very contemptuous. She was clearly saying that Lu Baishuang knew that Ji Tianqing was the reincarnation of Kenshin, so she shamelessly stuck to him, hoping that she could follow him and achieve meteoric success in the future. When the young martial saints of various countries heard Martial Saint Chen Yu's words, they all sneered and showed disdain. Lu Baishuang was so angry that her face turned pale. Her body trembled, but she could not say a word. Seeing that she was angry, Martial Saint Chen Yu covered her mouth and laughed. She said in a sweet voice, "Oh, I have said too much. I have exposed Holy Emperor Baishuang's thoughts in front of everyone. I am so sorry." This sentence was undoubtedly adding fuel to the fire. Lu Baishuang was unable to restrain her anger. She pointed at Martial Saint Chen Yu and scolded, "You vixen, do you think all women in the world are as shameless as you?" Martial Saint Chen Yu's face suddenly turned cold. Her voice became cold and sharp as she shouted, "Lu Baishuang! Who do you think you are? How dare you insult me in front of everyone?" Martial Saint Qing Shan, Chao Ying, and a few other young martial saints all glared at Lu Baishuang and scolded her. "Holy Emperor Baishuang, you insulted Martial Saint Chen Yu in public. This is not what a holy emperor should do. You insulted Martial Saint Chen Yu in front of the martial saints of various countries and martial artists. This is unforgivable. You must apologize to Martial Saint Chen Yu. Otherwise, your reputation will be ruined after today." Even the fourth divine child, Yuan Chong, stood out and shouted coldly at Lu Baishuang, "Apologize to Martial Saint Chen Yu immediately. Otherwise, we will jointly request that you be disqualified from participating in the sacred assembly." Chapter 2178. When Zhuo and Mu Changtian saw that Lu Baishuang was being ridiculed by the crowd, they stepped forward to help her. However, Yuan Chong and Marshal Saint Qing Shan had the advantage in numbers. A total of 12 young martial saints scolded Lu Baishuang and asked her to apologize to Marshal Saint Qinyu. Even Cloudy Sky Palace Master and Covered Island Master, the two martial arts masters, also put on the posture of martial arts seniors and lectured Lu Baishuang in a serious tone. After all, these martial saints were from the Heaven and Holy Nation or their vassal forces. The atmosphere on the stage became tense. Countless martial artists below the stage realized that something was wrong and started to discuss. Lu Baishuang was furious, but she was pressured by the crowd and could do nothing. However, to ask her to apologize to Marshal Saint Qinyu, that was absolutely impossible. She would rather give up on the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly than bow down to Marshal Saint Qinyu. However, once she gave up on the Sacred Assembly, it would be Marshal Saint Qinyu's victory. At that time, she did not know how the crowd would frame her and her reputation would be tarnished. When she thought of this, Lu Baishuang was furious and helpless. Her clear eyes were covered with a layer of mist. In the end, she gritted her teeth and made up her mind. She looked at Marshal Saint Qinyu and said with determination, "It was Marshal Saint Qinyu who slandered me first and you want me to apologize to her? Don't even think about it. Even if I give up on this." However, just as she was about to say that she would give up on the Sacred Assembly, she was interrupted by a voice. "That's right. No matter how big the world is, it can't be bigger than reason. You did nothing wrong, so why should you apologize? What's more, the other party is a vile and disgusting lowly servant who harbors evil intentions." It was the voice of a young man. It was cold and majestic, arrogant and domineering. The sound waves spread throughout the entire plaza, allowing everyone in the plaza to hear it clearly. Instantly, the hundreds of thousands of martial artists in the square were stunned and looked up at the sky. The 30 over martial saints on the heaven viewing platform were also shocked and turned to look at the sky. They saw a dazzling golden light flying over from not far away. In the blink of an eye, the golden light crossed a few dozen miles and landed on the heaven viewing platform. Shwa! After the golden light faded, a young man in a white robe appeared in front of everyone. He was handsome and valiant, with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. His entire body emitted a domineering aura that seemed like the might of the heavens, and his gaze was fierce like lightning, causing others to not dare look him in the eye. Lu Baishuang, who had been filled with grief and indignation, suddenly showed a look of relief when he saw Yang Kai appear, and the mist in his eyes quickly dissipated. As for Marshal Saint Qinyu, Marshal Saint Qing Shan, and the others, their expressions were cold and unpleasant. Without a doubt, it was Ji Tianqing. Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian smiled excitedly. They quickly cupped their hands and bowed to him. "Young Master Ji, you came at the right time." Marshal Sacred Qinyu, Marshal Sacred Qing Shan, and the others purposely humiliated Sacred Emperor Bai Shuang. Before they could finish, Ji Tianqing raised his hand to stop them. "There's no need to say more. I already know what happened." Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian immediately stopped talking. After exchanging glances, they quickly retreated to Lu Baishuang's side. Marshal Sacred Qinyu was dumbfounded by Ji Tianqing's scolding. She only collected her thoughts at this moment. She was furious and humiliated to the extreme, and could not help but cry bitterly. "Ji Tianqing! You bastard, you've gone too far. How dare you insult me in front of everyone? How dare you say such filthy words?" Marshal Sacred Qinyu was not the only one who was dumbfounded. The few 100,000 martial artists and the over 30 martial sages on the platform were also dumbfounded. No one had expected Ji Tianqing, who had not shown himself, to amaze the crowd with a single brilliant feat. What a disgusting, vile, evil, bitch. Such words could be said to have trampled on Marshal Sacred Qinyue's dignity, which was extremely humiliating. Ji Tianqing looked at Martial Sacred Qingyue expressionlessly and said in a cold tone, "So what if I insulted you? Those who insult others will be insulted by others. Holy Emperor Bai Shuang has no enmity with you, but you slandered her in front of everyone. Isn't this evil and despicable? You think that because you're pretty, you can please powerful men. You think that all women in the world are the same. You even said that you understand women the best. Ha ha ha. Aren't you disgusting? Which of the words that I scolded you with just now was wrong?" In just a few words, he had scolded Martial Sacred Qingyue so badly that she stood rooted to the ground with a dazed expression. She was so angry that her face was as white as paper, and her body was trembling like a sieve. She pointed at Ji Tianqing, but could not say a word. After taking a few deep breaths, she finally regained her strength. She stared at Ji Tianqing with a cold expression and shouted sternly, "Ji Tianqing! You insulted my reputation in front of everyone, I will never forgive you. This hatred and humiliation can only be appeased by killing you." Ji Tianqing looked at her indifferently and said in an indifferent tone, "You? Forget it, I don't want to kill women. Moreover, you're a brainless idiot." After saying that, he did not even bother to look at Martial Sacred Qingyue. His contempt was obvious. Martial Sacred Qingyue was so angry that she almost went crazy. She opened her mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood. The two martial sages beside her quickly supported her and circulated their energy to help her recuperate. Lu Baishuang was originally filled with grief and indignation. Now that she saw Martial Sacred Qingyue being humiliated to the extreme and being angered to the point of vomiting blood by Ji Tianqing, she felt that her anger had been vented, and the anger in her heart dissipated. She looked at Ji Tianqing with gratitude and muttered in her heart, "Despicable guy, your mouth is so poisonous. You can actually anger me to the point of vomiting blood with just your mouth. In the past, you always made me so angry that I lost my sense of propriety. Now it seems that you've already been merciful with your words." At this time, Martial Sacred Qing Shan stepped forward and stared at Ji Tianqing with a sharp gaze. He shouted angrily, "Ji Tianqing! You've gone too far. You're a Martial Sacred, the heavenly imperial guardian of the Luoshui divine nation. How dare you humiliate a weak woman like this? You've lost all your face." Ji Tianqing glanced at him and said with a faint smile, "Hee hee. I humiliated Martial Sacred Qingyue, and I've lost all my face. Then what about the dozen of you martial sages, men and women, old and young, teaming up to humiliate Holy Emperor Bai Shuang? Isn't she a weak woman? Yet you want to force her to apologize in public and disqualify her from participating in the sacred assembly? Then what are you doing? Extremely shameless. So despicable that it makes people's hair stand on end. You shameless martial sages from the Heaven Extinction Divine Nation are really eye-opening. I'm really glad that I didn't come yesterday. Being on the same stage as you is simply a great pain." Ji Tianqing not only scolded Martial Sacred Qing Shan, but he also pointed at Yuan Chong, Chao Ing and the 10 young martial sages. Even Island Master Fu and the Cloudy Sky Palace Master could not escape his insults. For a moment, the young martial sages' faces were ashen, and their eyes were burning with anger. Chapter 2179. Ji Tianqing. You are simply lawless. Young man, this is the Heaven's End Divine Nation. You are not allowed to be impudent. You are too arrogant. The Covered Island Lord and the Cloud Firmament Palace Lord rebuked Ji Tianqing at the same time. Ji Tianqing was fearless as he looked at them sharply. His lips curled up in a cold smile. You know that you are in the wrong and cannot defend yourself. You only know how to slander others. What I said is true. How am I arrogant? How am I lawless? Also, don't put on the airs of a senior before me. You are not worthy. The Covered Island Lord and the Cloud Firmament Palace Lord trembled in anger. Their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. The two of them were famous martial Tao masters. They had always been respected by others. Wherever they went, they would be praised by countless people. Naturally, the two of them were pampered and looked down on others. However, they did not expect Ji Tianqing to not have any scruples at all. He did not give them any face at all. He rebuked the two of them in front of everyone. It was so embarrassing that they wanted to die. However, Ji Tianqing was right. He was Kenshin's reincarnation. With his identity and background, who dared to call him young? Who dared to put on the airs of a senior before him? The Cloud Firmament Palace Lord took a deep breath to suppress his anger. His eyes flickered with a cold light as he said in a sinister tone, Ji Tianqing, you are indeed even more arrogant than the rumors say. However, I am a magnanimous person and will not lower myself to your level. Let's see how long you can be arrogant for. Ji Tianqing said expressionlessly, longer than your little life. You. The Cloud Firmament Palace Lord suppressed his anger with great difficulty. Now, he was angered to the point of nearly exploding on the spot. The Covered Island Lord quickly changed the topic. He said with a cold expression, Ji Tianqing, you are so protective of the Holy Emperor Bai Shuang. For her, you are willing to go against all the martial sages. You are really infatuated. It is Holy Emperor Bai Shuang's honor to be able to climb up a branch like you. Ji Tianqing frowned and looked at him coldly. He said in a deep voice, Holy Emperor Bai Shuang is my friend. When my friend is in trouble, I will do my best to help her. This is a basic principle. I will only explain this once. If anyone dares to spread rumors to slander and tarnish my reputation, I will invite him to hell to die. Covered Island Lord, you should be thankful that you are still alive. The low and cold voice spread throughout the entire square, allowing the hundreds of thousands of people to hear it clearly. There was a soul-suppressing soul power in his voice, the Covered Island Lord's voice. For a time, hundreds of thousands of cultivators held their breaths, their hearts filled with fear as they stood rooted to the ground, not daring to make the slightest noise. The more than 30 martial sages on the stage were also stunned by his aura. They were all stunned for a moment. When the many martial sages regained their senses, they felt deeply ashamed and angry. They thought to themselves, how could I be intimidated by him? Yuan Chong, who was wearing a golden robe, looked at Ji Tianqing with a cold smile. He clapped and said, good. Ji Tianqing, you are so impressive. Yesterday, you disdained to show up. Today, you scolded all the martial saints. Ji Tianqing, your arrogance and overbearingness really make me gasp in amazement. As he spoke, Yuan Chong walked out of the crowd and stood in front of Ji Tianqing, confronting him. The martial saints of the Heaven Extinction Divine Nation suddenly had a backbone. They looked like they were watching a good show. Because Yuan Chong was powerful and had a noble status. He was not afraid of Ji Tianqing at all. But what everyone did not expect was that Ji Tianqing looked at Yuan Chong and asked with a frown, who are you? He asked calmly and naturally. He did not mean to humiliate Yuan Chong. After all, he did not know Yuan Chong. But this sentence made the faces of many martial saints change. Yuan Chong was so angry that his face turned green. He laughed and said, good. Ji Tianqing, you are very good. You even dare to humiliate me. It seems that you are determined to go against us. Ji Tianqing was even more confused. He asked in confusion, is there something wrong with your brain? I don't know you. I just asked casually. How can you take it as a humiliation? Are you used to being humiliated by others? Or are you deliberately trying to provoke a dispute? Ji Tianqing's expression and tone were very natural. No one could tell that he was pretending. But the more he was like this, the more angry and humiliated Yuan Chong and the dozen young martial saints felt. Finally, Martial Saint Xingshan could not stand it anymore. He coughed and said, Ji Tianqing was not here yesterday. It is normal that he does not know the fourth prince. Ji Tianqing, let me introduce you. This is the fourth prince, Yuan Chong. Marshal Saint Xingshan wanted to smooth things over. Ji Tianqing naturally appreciated it. He nodded slightly and said, Marshal Saint Xingshan is reasonable. Thank you for the introduction. When Yuan Chong heard this, he was so angry that his nose almost became crooked. He cursed in his heart, damn bastard, he is definitely humiliating me. Similarly, no one introduced him. He knows Marshal Saint Xingshan but does not know me. Is this possible? Anger surged in his chest. Yuan Chong pointed at Ji Tianqing and said proudly, Ji Tianqing, now that we are in public, you can show off however you want. Wait until we are on the void stage. I will let you know how powerful I am. Don't think that you are so great just because you took 3 moves from Wu Duantian. I can do the same, and far better than you. You should pray that you don't meet me on the void stage. Otherwise. Humph. He didn't say the rest of his words. He only snorted coldly and meaningfully. But everyone on the stage understood what he meant. Ji Tianqing was not angry. He said calmly, although I don't know you, I have heard some news about you. I heard that you are Yuan Zhen's 4th brother. You have been number 1 in the Divine Martial Sacred Assembly for a few years. Your talent and strength is second only to Yuan Zhen. You are known as Heaven and God Nation's number 2. Cough cough, number 2 genius. No one knew if it was a slip of the tongue or if he said it wrong on purpose. Anyway, his serious expression did not look like he was talking nonsense. Yuan Chong was so angry that he gritted his teeth. But he could only endure it. He said coldly, since you know my strength, then you should know how stupid and laughable your previous words were. No. Ji Tianqing shook his head lightly. He said calmly, I want to tell you that from today onwards, you are no longer number 1. What do you mean? Yuan Chong frowned. He stared at him with a gloomy expression. Ji Tianqing said indifferently, because, I am here. It was a simple sentence. There was no sense of exaggeration. But it was filled with absolute confidence and dominance. Yuan Chong's pupils constricted. He said coldly, you are arrogant. But, I will trample you under my feet. Ji Tianqing retracted his gaze. He could not be bothered with him anymore. He walked back to Lu Baishuang's side. He stood side by side with Zhuo Mingqi and Mu Changtian. At the same time, he secretly transmitted his voice to Lu Baishuang, when can you change your straightforward personality? Chapter 2180. Lu Baishuang turned her head and glanced at Ji Tianqing. She wanted to explain, but when the words reached her mouth, she swallowed them back. She didn't know what to say. Should she tell Ji Tianqing that she didn't want to see others slander him, so she stood up for him? She just wanted to protect his reputation and innocence. She didn't consider her own situation at all. Even though she thought so, she didn't want to say it out loud. She didn't want Ji Tianqing to think that her care and protection was equal to the love between a man and a woman. She didn't want Ji Tianqing to think that she had ulterior motives and was deliberately trying to get close to him. Even though she had some inexplicable feelings in her heart, she also had her own dignity and principles. She didn't want to be looked down upon by Ji Tianqing. After a while, Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the Sky City Lord arrived together and landed on the Skyview platform. Yuan Zhen was quick-witted. When he saw the expressions of the martial saints, he guessed that something unpleasant had happened. But he didn't ask too much, so as not to affect the Shenwu Sacred Assembly. Everyone, today there are 28 young martial saints gathered together. They will enter the Void platform and participate in the martial arts competition. No matter how mysterious and bizarre their words are during the martial arts competition, in the end, they have to rely on their powerful strength to be convincing enough. So, I'm looking forward to the performance of the young martial saints on the void platform. Yuan Zhen said with a smile, his tone full of expectation. The martial arts competition will be conducted by drawing lots. 2 pairs will fight. The winner will advance and the loser will be eliminated. 28 young martial saints will participate in the competition. Only the top 5 will be rewarded. As for the people in the square, you can also watch the competition through the 8 illusory light screens. Everyone, I hope that this sacred assembly can be held smoothly and have a happy ending. As his voice fell, the martial arts competition officially began. The hundreds of thousands of warriors in the square all showed excitement and expectation, cheering and shouting. Qin Zheng and the Sky City Lord personally opened the array of the Skyview platform. Suddenly, the 8 directions of the Skyview platform lit up with dazzling silver light, forming 8 huge light screens. Every light screen showed a pitch-black void. It was the void platform. Then, Yuan Zhen personally used a secret technique, waving his palm and shooting out a dazzling golden light into the heaven viewing platform. Suddenly, the sky above the heaven viewing platform lit up with a resplendent golden light, forming a 10-meter-tall door of light. On the golden door, there were mysterious and profound array patterns that emitted powerful spatial fluctuations. Yuan Zhen took the lead and flew into the sky, stepping into the golden door of light. Qin Zheng and the Sky City Lord followed closely behind, followed by the 6 veteran martial sages. After they all entered the door of light, Yuan Chong led the young martial sages into the door of light one after another. Shua. Ji Tianqing and Lu Baishuang entered the door of light one after the other. They felt a flash of light in front of them, and then they found themselves in the cold, dark void. The 2 of them stood still in the void and raised their heads to look ahead. They saw Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the others standing on a white light disk with a radius of 10,000 feet. The disk formed by the white light looked like a square, but it also looked like a spatial array. The ground was solid, as tough as a divine artifact. In the center of the white light disk, there was a shining golden door, leading to an unknown place. Except for Ji Tianqing and Wenren Jiusheng, it was not the first time for the others to come to the void platform. Groups of 3 to 5 people were standing on the white disk of light, discussing with each other through telepathy. Yuan Zhen, Qin Zheng, and the others were busy counting people and making preparations. Seizing this opportunity, Ji Tianqing looked around and sized up his surroundings. In front of the white light disk was a vast and boundless void. It was dark and cold, without a trace of spiritual qi. However, at the edge of the void, there was a huge golden light screen, which had a radius of 500 miles. The golden light curtain was like a huge ball of light that floated quietly in the void. The 500 miles of void inside the light ball was the famous void platform, which was the arena for the martial arts competition. The void outside the light ball was boundless, full of unknown dangers. In the entire void platform, there was nothing but the white light disk under everyone's feet. Ji Tianqing knew that when the martial arts competition began, the martial saints on the platform would fight fiercely in the void. The rest of the martial saints would watch the battle from the white light disk. The battle in the void would be projected on the 8 light screens in Wangtian City Square through the array, for hundreds of thousands of martial artists to watch. However, the scene on the white light disk would not be projected. After a short few minutes, Yuan Zhen and Qin Zheng were ready. Not only did they prepare to draw lots, but they also activated the defensive array of the white light disk to ensure that the aftermath of the battle on the void platform would not affect the others. Yuan Zhen held 28 jade slips in his hand and said to the crowd, "Okay, the 28 young martial saints participating in the martial arts competition, get ready to draw lots. To ensure fairness, Lord Qin and I will not participate in the drawing of lots. We are only responsible for hosting and supervising the martial arts competition. The matter of drawing lots will be left to the 6 martial saints." After saying that, he waved his right hand and threw the 28 jade slips into the air. Swish! 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 After a few breaths, the 28 jade slips spread out and lined up in the air. Each jade slip recorded a young martial saint's name, age, strength, and other information. The covered island master cupped his hands and bowed to the crowd. He said with a smile, "For the first round of the sacred assembly, I will draw lots first. Good luck." After saying that, he waved his hand and shot out 14 golden lights toward the 28 jade slips. Swish! 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 In the blink of an eye, the 28 jade slips were divided into 14 pieces and floated in front of him. He picked up the jade slips in front of him and announced loudly, "For the first round, Martial Saint Qinyue will fight against Martial Saint Tianchang, Martial Saint Bai Shuang will fight against Martial Saint Tianqin, Martial Saint Yuanchong will fight against Martial Saint Ru Feng, Martial Saint Tianqing will fight against Martial Saint Lu Kei, Martial Saint Qingshan will fight against." As the covered island master announced the names of the martial saints one after another, the expressions of the more than 20 martial saints became interesting. Some of them looked indifferent and calm. Some of them were full of confidence and smiled. Naturally, there were also some who frowned and looked serious. After all, there was a lot of chance in the drawing of lots. If one was lucky and met a weaker opponent, he would be able to advance to the second round of the competition. However, if the martial saints were unlucky and met a stronger opponent, they would be defeated in the first round and leave the competition. Lu Baishuang frowned and quietly looked at a middle-aged man in the crowd. Her eyes flashed with a hint of seriousness. Ji Tianqing noticed this and asked secretly, "What's wrong? Is there a problem with the drawing of lots?" Chapter 2181. Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, Lu Baishuang nodded slightly. "Not very strong, but very strong." Ji Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked, "That Heaven Heart Martial Saint, what was his ranking in the last sacred assembly?" "Fifth." "What about you?" "Sixth." Lu Baishuang said in a low voice with a tinge of unwillingness. "Among the martial saints who came to the sacred assembly, I was ranked the highest, but I couldn't even enter the top 5. Therefore, the Luoshui divine nation has always been criticized as the weakest divine nation." Ji Tianqing was even more confused and asked, "Strange, I saw that the results of the first round were basically a battle between the strong and the weak. There was not much suspense in the outcome. Why is it that when it comes to you, it has become a battle between the strong?" Lu Baishuang shook her head and said in a low voice, "In the last 2 sacred assemblies, I lost to the Heaven Heart Martial Saint. I heard that 10 years ago, he mastered a peerless sword technique, and his strength increased by leaps and bounds. This battle, I'm afraid that I..." Ji Tianqing thought for a moment, and his eyes became much colder. He transmitted his voice, "It seems that there is a problem with the results of the draw. It was most likely arranged by Yuan Zhen. The Heaven Heart Martial Saint was originally stronger than you, and 10 years ago, his strength increased greatly. He definitely had the confidence to defeat you. Yuan Zhen did this on purpose to eliminate you in the first round and make you lose face." Lu Baishuang nodded and said indifferently, "They just want to humiliate me. What a despicable person. If I was eliminated in the first round, I would not even be able to enter the top 14. I would become a laughing stock, and the reputation of the Luoshui divine nation would be damaged." Ji Tianqing shook his head and looked at her with a smile. He said in a certain tone, "Don't worry, no matter what schemes they have, don't even think about destroying the reputation of the Luoshui divine nation. What you lost, I will help you get back with interest." Lu Baishuang turned to look at him. After a moment of silence, she nodded seriously and said, "Good. I hope that you can amaze the world with a single brilliant feat and trample everyone under your feet. Only then can you vent your hatred and take revenge on them for surrounding us." Ji Tianqing smiled and nodded. At this moment, the the first battle was about to begin. A middle-aged man dressed in grey linen clothes and carrying an ancient sword with inscriptions on his back was the first to step into the golden door of light in the middle of the disk. Shwa! With a flash of golden light, he left the white light disk and appeared in the void 100 miles away. Evidently, this person was Marshal Saint Tian Chang, the successor of a hidden sect from the vast divine nation. Marshal Saint Chinyu, who was dressed in a long pink dress, smiled sweetly at the martial saints beside her before turning around and flying into the door of light. Everyone, wait for my triumphant return. Marshal Saint Qing Shan, Chao Ying, and the others all cheered for her. Marshal Saint Chinyue, Marshal Saint Tian Chang is no match for you. You can easily win. In my opinion, we'll see the result in 15 minutes at most. Marshal Saint Chinyu is ranked in the top 10, but Marshal Saint Tian Chang is at the bottom. In the blink of an eye, Marshal Saint Chinyue also left the white light disk and appeared in the void. She stood 10,000 feet away from Marshal Saint Tian Chang and bowed with a smile. She said in a sweet voice, Marshal Saint Tian Chang, my body is weak. Please go easy on me. Not only was her voice sweet and charming, but her eyes were also filled with seduction. If it were anyone else, they would have accepted it for the sake of dignity and politeness. However, Marshal Saint Tian Chang was very old-fashioned. He said expressionlessly, Marshal Saint Chinyue, you must be joking. You're a martial saint ranked in the top 10. How can I not use my full strength? Marshal Saint Chinyue's face immediately turned cold. She snorted and said, Humph. You're so ungentlemanly. Since that's the case, I won't hold back. As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her arms and waved her pink embroidered sleeves. She shot out 99 dark red roses toward Marshal Saint Tian Chang. The sky full of roses pierced through the void, blooming with a captivating red brilliance, looking extremely dazzling and gorgeous. However, the 99 Japanese roses were all condensed from magic power and contained terrifying power. Marshal Saint Tian Chang did not dare to be careless. He hurriedly took out the ancient inscripted sword on his back and assumed a defensive posture. He formed a sword seal with his left hand and waved the ancient silver sword with his right. Cold sword light filled the sky and formed a sword net in front of him. The two of them started to fight. They each displayed their strengths. Lights flew everywhere in the void and colorful shockwaves kept bursting out. Boom boom boom. The loud noise reverberated on the void platform, causing layers of ripples to appear in the dark void. One after another, shockwaves washed over the white disk like waves of the sea. Fortunately, the white light disk had a protective shield that blocked the power of the shockwaves. Many martial saints were watching the battle on the disk and were not affected at all. In the square of Wangtian City, hundreds of thousands of martial artists were focused on the silver light screen. The scene on the void platform was clearly displayed on the light screen that was thousands of feet long. Seeing Tianzhong and Chenyu, the two martial sages, fighting to the point where light splashed everywhere and the light of magic filled the sky, the numerous cultivators also cheered one after another as they discussed in high spirits. Martial Saint Chenyu is indeed a peerless beauty. Not only is she beautiful and strong, even her magic power is magnificent. It really makes people admire her. Martial Saint Tian Chang's sword technique seems to have originated from a hidden sect in the ancient times. He has the demeanor of a peerless master. It's a pity that Martial Saint Chenyu has always had the upper hand. Her strength is obviously stronger than Martial Saint Tian Chang. Wow! Martial Saint Tian Chang's sword technique was so exciting. It really made people gasp in amazement. Sigh. It's a pity that the light screen can only see the scene on the void platform but not hear the sound. If we could hear the sound of their battle, it would be even more exciting, right? In the huge square, discussions and exclamations sounded one after another. It was very lively. The mood of the hundreds of thousands of martial artists also rose and fell with the battle on the void platform. Unknowingly, half an hour passed. Marshal Saint Chen Yu and Marshal Saint Tian Chang had also fought over 10,000 moves. Their magic power was greatly depleted. The battle came to an end. Marshal Saint Chen Yu's face was slightly pale. Her long hair was a little messy, and her hair bun and headdress were messy. There were also 4 long and narrow wounds on her arms and shoulders, from which dark red blood was constantly seeping out. However, Marshal Saint Tian Chang's situation was even worse. His hair was disheveled and his clothes were ragged. His entire body was stained with blood. His magic power aura was also very chaotic. It was obvious that he was seriously injured. Both sides used all their strength to fight over 100 moves. In the end, Marshal Saint Tian Chang was sent flying backward. He vomited blood and fell into the void. His soul was injured and his consciousness was blurry. Before he could regain his consciousness, Marshal Saint Chen Yu teleported in front of him and held 2 sabers to his neck. Marshal Saint Tian Chang, thank you for letting me win. Marshal Saint Chen Yu's lips curled into a cold smile. She raised her hands and kept her sabers. Then, she turned and left. You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.